Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we want to start. Please have a seat. I call to order the second leadership dialogue of the international meeting entitled Stockholm+50, a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, our responsibility, our opportunity. Allow me to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this leadership dialogue. I am Steffi Lemke, Federal Minister of the Environment, Nature Protection, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection of Germany, and I'm honored to serve as your co-chair together with Ambassador Tritariat, Director General for Multilateral Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. The topic of this morning's leadership dialogue is achieving a sustainable and inclusive recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. A background paper, this topic has been issued as document A Conference 238/5. The summary of our discussions here this morning will be presented to the closing plenary meeting of the international meeting this afternoon. I am also pleased to inform participants that Ms. Shabala will serve as our moderator. Allow me at this point to deliver some remarks in my capacity as co-chair of this important leadership dialogue. I'm delighted that we are here today in Stockholm to discuss how we can shape our green economic recovery after the coronavirus pandemic. After 3 informal working group sessions and 1 meeting in New York, a background paper has been developed. Given the richness of inputs that have been provided to us through the informal working group meetings, we as co-chairs together with the co-hosts have decided to also give a summary of these discussions in the form of key messages. So if there are aspects in these documents which you find commendable, please feel free to highlight them. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has had drastic economic and social impacts. It has set back efforts worldwide to implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For example, since the beginning of the pandemic, 100 million people have been driven back into extreme poverty, and even though CO2 emissions fell briefly during the pandemic, they have since risen again to a record high. Vulnerable population groups have been especially hard hit. Once again, it became clear that individual countries cannot tackle global crises alone. We need joint commitment and international solidarity to make sure no one is left behind. Shared determination to solve global problems together is also essential for tackling other crises. The fight against climate change and biodiversity loss requires global cooperation to achieve long-term solutions. A new kind of relationship with nature and efficient and sustainable use for natural resources can be key to finding these solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, which cross-cutting issues are crucial to overcoming the negative impacts of the pandemic while also achieving our climate and environmental goals. Let us use this leadership dialogue to discuss this question. In this context, the transition to a circular economy is of utmost importance. The latest IPCC report showed that to tackle the climate crisis is not enough to focus on CO2 emissions alone. The extraction and processing of natural resources is responsible for more than 90% of global biodiversity loss and for around half of global greenhouse gas emissions. It also has serious impacts on the water balance. Stakeholders stressed that green recovery measures should concentrate on so-called high-impact sectors. And in other words, the sectors that were most affected by COVID-19 and that are essential for sustainable development. The focus was on 3 high-impact sectors. Food production, which alone is responsible for 60% of global biodiversity loss. The energy sector and the rising demand for resources to manufacture relevant technologies. Sustainable production patterns. They can lead to an enormous reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in individual sectors. Most policy measures overlook these problems. Jet system-based solutions for resource efficiency offer enormous economic, social, and environmental opportunities. The same applies to digitalization, which bring both opportunities and risk for sustainable development. I am pleased that the United Nations is addressing this important issue. Ladies and gentlemen, today we would like to ask you the following 2 questions. Which aspects of the background paper and key messages are the most important ones? And how can these best be realized? I look forward to the discussion. And I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to my fellow kosher Ambassador Tri Tariat to deliver some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Minister Lemke. Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My appreciation goes to the co-host, the government of Sweden in Kenya, for organizing the Stockholm+50 process, as well as the UNEP Secretariat. The road we forged to get here has been long and fruitful. For Leadership Dialogue 2, we had 3 informal working groups that have proven to be fruitful to develop bottom-up recommendations in the global recovery process. It has been an inclusive process that were attended by participants from all over the world, from every gender, stakeholders, and age group, including an 11-year-old boy from California, our youngest participant. Ladies and gentlemen, our shared understanding is that to ensure a strong, sustainable, and inclusive recovery, we must first acknowledge the challenges and impacts posed by the pandemic, whether in the economic, social, and environmental developments. Coupled with problems due to uneven health access and vaccination rate, supply chain, employment and labor market, and global trade, this situation has caused a wider gap of inequality between developed and developing countries. The 2022 World Economic Situation and Prospects report has also estimated that the global economic slowdown is expected to continue into next year. Global output is projected to grow by only 4.0% in 2022 and 3.5% in 2023. Further, the challenges of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, combating climate change, and eradicating poverty have become increasingly more difficult. A report by the UN Secretary General stresses that even before the pandemic, the SDGs were not on track to be met by 2030. Now the pandemic has delayed the achievement of the targets even further. Distinguished delegates, before we continue our deliberations, I wish to share with you the following key considerations for a more sustainable and inclusive recovery reflected during our informal working groups. First, it is significant to address the gaps that have emerged and been exacerbated by the pandemic. We must recover together to push global sustainable development. Second, it is imperative to be inclusive and to create an enabling environment that can encourage collaboration among all levels of society and stakeholders and genuine partnership among countries. Third, it is essential to move forward by staying true to the principle of no one left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to today's discussion and inputs from all panelists and all participants. Thank you so much, and I now hand the meeting over to Ms. Nozibo Shabalala to moderate the interactive segment of the Leadership Dialogue. Mr. Shabalala, Madam Shabalala, you have the floor.
Co-chairs, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, once again, we find ourselves now at Leadership Dialogue 2. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage now our first set of panelists. I'm going to be joined by Mr. Dominic Warre. He's the Senior Advisor to the CEO at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Ms. Reem Al-Safar, the co-founder and Executive Director of the MENA Youth Network, joins us as well this morning. Mr. Gonzalo Munoz, the Chairman of the Board of Tricyclos, joins us, and we round off this panel discussion with Her Excellency Josefa Leonel Correa Sacco, the Commissioner for Agriculture, Rural Development, the Blue Economy and Sustainable Development of the African Union Commission. Please do take your seats. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, our process remains the same as yesterday. I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to some questions that are really going to help us just to set the scene for this particular leadership dialogue. And then I'm going to invite them to hold a listening posture, because we're going to come back to you, to the floor, and we're going to lift the contributions in terms of national statements as well as stakeholders from the UN system. And then I'm going to come back to the panel and give them a very brief opportunity to react to some of the statements and the contributions that they've heard, and then we're going to repeat it with a second panel and a second round of contributions from the floor. Dominic, I'm going to start off with you. You're closest to me, but also one of the themes we touched on yesterday was the very urgent system-wide transformation that is required, especially in the context of high-impact sectors. And the conversation yesterday was clear that we need this in order to accelerate the shift towards more sustainable consumption and production. With that as a backdrop, the question to you is, we know that business has been preparing an action agenda for Stockholm that seeks to be transformational. What are the key messages that are coming out of this action agenda?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a delight to be here. And yes, with the invitation of the Swedish and Kenyan Secretariat in close collaboration with our friends and colleagues at UNEP, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development with the Stockholm Environment Institute triggered a process involving 70 global businesses, stakeholders, business associations, key actors, to look at what we call global value chains. So not just what one business does, but how value chains around the world connect together in things like electronics and fashion and construction and mobility and travel and tourism, things like that. And what we found out from that discussion to feed into the leadership dialogue and into Stockholm+50 was very interesting indeed, and it's the following. You will all be aware that there's been much kind of business mobilization, financial mobilization into the climate COPs and into other areas with coalitions and collaborations and activities. It is progressing. it could progress faster and it could progress at a bigger scale. What is holding this movement back now are some structural issues which that community would like to present. There is an action agenda, as you say, which sets these out, but effectively there are three big areas. The first area is very much in accountability and transparency. If there could be a mechanism co-developed to enable a program to set out exactly how businesses and investors are progressing against these science-based targets that have been set, that each of you and everyone who's watching could easily find online and could trust the data. Yeah. We could see how the dashboard is moving towards success. So a global accountability and transparency mechanism. There's some great work going on in many different areas, but we need collaboration with the international community to bring that to the next level. Second, a global circularity protocol. There's so much activity going on in materials innovation, in process efficiency across value chains, and in reuse of materials. We know, we heard from the speaker that circularity is a key issue, but across borders, it's really difficult to transport waste at the moment. There are no common definitions or common harmonization of standards or indeed kind of metrics or what is circularity as a financial asset class. If a community like this could work with some from the business associations and others to create almost a very punchy protocol that can deliver to 2030, that would be a real breakthrough. Think how the Montreal Protocol brought together business and governments. And then finally, something on skills.
Skills.
And that skills are very much, as you see in the note here, about innovation and training and drawing on the best from the global businesses to work closely with the international community to stimulate jobs, innovation, growth, and the corporate muscle to collaborate with the international community. That's the three big areas. The Stockholm Action Agenda, you'll find it on the website and all the related pieces here. So we're delighted to present it, and we launched it yesterday. Keen to follow up. Thank you very much.
Dominic, thank you very much. A global accountability and transparency mechanism, a global circularity protocol, and a more deliberate focus on skills as well. So, as I continue with the conversation, if I can kindly ask all of those who've just come into the room to kindly please all take their seats as well. Let me come to you. We've heard from Dominic very clear three structural issues as he identifies them. I do want to go back to yet another topic that we touched on yesterday, which was the topic of strengthened cooperation on access to green technologies and digital technologies being a part of that as well, already recognized as fundamental to the recovery process. What are your key messages to the decision makers of today in the context of a recovery and in the context of a sustainable future?
Thank you very much. I would say that, first of all, there are huge discrepancies in the difference of access to green technologies between developed and developing countries. Looking at how our meeting here in Stockholm is about commemorating the past and looking towards the future, how we remember and acknowledge the work that was done 50 years ago, I want to invite you all to also acknowledge the historical roots of these discrepancies, to ask why, and not deliberately ignore the fact that many of the developing countries have had a merciless and exploitative colonial past, where these lands have had their resources being constantly taken advantage of, their societies and economies destabilized, and their progress hindered by decades. And so when we look at the issue of finance in respect to climate action, green technologies, and support towards developing countries, we need to change our perspective. For it is not charity, it is retribution. When we do facilitate this financial access to green technologies, we must ensure that we do not stop at adaptation and mitigation, but also include prevention in the process. For it is not efficient to fund green solutions on one end while subsidizing fossil fuels on the other. In this transition, we need to upscale and enhance circular economy systems in building up from COVID-19 pandemic, especially when it comes to recycling, e-waste, and capacity building, especially for youth. We need to provide support and capacity building for workers and youth affected by the green transition, and make sure that they have protected rights and social security. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many young people around the world were affected, especially in regards to education, where a lot of the sectors in education have transferred online, and many young people in rural areas, in countries that do not have good access to the internet, for example, they were denied education. They were sitting at home, no schooling whatsoever. And so that is why we need to create and implement strategies to include digital connectivity, in particular in rural communities, to ensure increased resilience in the context of current and future health crises. And finally, I would like to highlight that youth are our main resource. Many regions have a majority of youth in their populations. 2/3 of the MENA region, for example, is made up of youth. Yet we are the least people to be included in policy decisions. So we need to invest in youth because they are our greatest resource. Thank you.
Reem, thank you very much, and definitely deserves a round of applause. Many action items that she's put on the agenda for the decision makers of today, including being more deliberate about the inclusion of young people. Ladies and gentlemen, the acoustics in this room do not allow us to have multiple meetings. So if I can kindly request for the meeting in the back of the room to be broken up, because it is traveling up onto the stage. I do appreciate that very much. Reem, thank you very much for that. Now, let me then come to you, Mr. Munoz, as we build on some of what we've heard from Dominic and what we've heard from Reem. And you'll notice that we're really focusing on the actions today. So very simply, from your perspective, what are the top actions for transforming high-impact sectors? We heard the co-chairs talking about our impact sectors, but I want us to bring in the lens of small and medium-sized enterprises so that they are active participants in those sectors.
Well, thanks so much, Noisy, and great to be here. I would say the first thing is absolutely related to what Dominic just mentioned. It's about value change, right? And many times we hear about the excuse for major companies saying, it's really hard for me to commit if I don't have my providers, my value chain also well committed to, for example, climate action. Well, we do have that tool. So the first tool would be join the SME Climate Hub. We have developed the right concrete tool and the playbook for SMEs from all around the world. We're searching for 500,000 SMEs from all around the world to join the race to zero. And therefore, imagine a world where we have all SMEs just committed, even to their scope 1 and 2, that will take care of the scope 3 by its own. Right? So you will not need any scope 3 as long as you have all the value chain committed to the scopes 1 and 2. And in many countries, you have already the government taking care of the electricity grid. You have a way to phasing out of coal and the fossil fuels. That trajectory is happening. And we need the SMEs to commit. That's very concrete and something that they should do. The other one is about the general sense that we are facing a very challenging times, and that means a lot of purposes around. So I think that for every SME in the world would be important to really grow and live with a purpose in the center. In that sense, there's also a very concrete tool to manage that. That's the B Corp certification process. Use the B impact assessment. 120,000 companies from all around the world, many of them being SMEs, are already using that tool to manage a purpose and to grow with that in the center, and therefore really be part of those companies that are giving more than what they take all around the world. And the third one, it's all about investing in nature. Most of the SMEs from the world, and I'm speaking as a co-founder of SMEs in the Global South working in the natural environment, we're farmers, we're people working in the natural environment. We need to invest in nature. That will pay back. We tend to think that it must be just an expense. It's not. This is the moment where SMEs in the world should put nature in the center at any level. It can be just planting a tree or delivering their business model through nature. That is a very concrete way in which they can collaborate, not only towards the global goals, but also to the interest of those big multinationals or big companies in which they are mostly integrated.
Gonzalo, I think that's an excellent contribution. So there's a SME climate club. There's a very clear call to action to put purpose at the center, be an SME that gives more than it takes, which I think is an excellent call as well, but also put nature at the center and invest. And what I'm loving about your message is that it's saying the business of recovery in an inclusive and a sustainable way is not just a big business opportunity, it's for all of us. Your Excellency, let me come to you with the final question. When we look at the sectors that you lead at the African Union, we see sectors that are absolutely vital to an inclusive and sustainable COVID recovery. So then, how do you see the alignment of this recovery with the longer-term sustainability in agriculture, in rural development, in the blue economy, and all of this within the context of Africa?
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor. Good morning, the audience. I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this important dialogue, leadership dialogue, on the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the 1972 UN Conference on Human Environment. Thank you very much. I have only 2 minutes. I have to be short. Talking about my continent, I can take 1 hour, but I have to reduce and really go straight to what you asked me. For a sustainable recovery in Africa, we need to reinforce the foundation we have built in agricultural transformation through our CADEP. I don't know if you're familiar with the CADEP, the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program strategy. Yesterday, the Secretary General of the UN said it rightly, we have all the tools and we need to go to implementation. So we need really to reinforce the CADEP. This is our common policy to transform agriculture on the continent. So we have it, and I call upon all the partners that are here. Some of them I can recognize, acknowledge the presence of my sister Elena Semedo, that we'll be working together, because this CADEP was really a commitment of our head of state in 2003 in Maputo. And the head of states, they decided that for us to invest in agriculture, because it's a very important sector, because we need to feed Africa, and also to invest in agriculture, and also to improve our food security status in Africa in order to avoid malnutrition and hunger on the continent. So 10 years after we came out, our head of state came out, they made an evaluation that there was not much progress. Investing, the head of state then, they say at least 10% in the public expenditure in the budget.
Yeah.
But how many people are doing it? We have the biannual review report at the Commission, and we know that the progress is very low. And we really need to go ahead, because as you said, this is a very important sector. But it's been, for the last 2 decades, it's been going through a lot of shocks, from conflicts, from climate change, from invasive species like the fall armyworm, the desert cricket in the Horn of Africa. So all those, and compounded with the COVID-19 pandemic. Today we have the Russia and Ukrainian war. So all these affects really the development of this sector.
Yeah.
So we need to take serious measure. Immediately when we had the COVID-19 pandemic, we were surprised, and I tried to cooperate with the sister organization, which is the FAO. We try to cooperate in order to come out with a really serious measure, so that we will not impact on the distribution, the distribution chain of our continent, because of those sanitary measures that our government set, the lockdown, the closing of borders. So we had to create really, a coordination among the most important stakeholders. And then we came out with a very good ministerial conference, and we have the declaration on what we should supposed to do. And a task force was set up, made with the FAO, the WFP, IFAD, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the EU. We are all working in order to address this question that you just asked me.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And I think your message is resounding, because you're saying that it's not enough for us just to have the tools. We've actually got to use them, and you're using CADAP to remind us of that. But also some practical things like setting a target of 10% expenditure of the public budget, and really focusing it on these high impact sectors. So what I'm going to do right now is that I'm going to go to the floor, because we're going to begin to maybe open up the conversation a little bit more. I'm going to ask again my panelists, as we do this, for you to retain your listening posture. So the poet David White says that a conversation is listened into existence more than it is spoken. And so we're going to tap into that energy a little bit now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start off with His Excellency Amin Benadaramani, the Prime Minister of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria. Your Excellency, as you take to the floor, a quick reminder to everyone that we are requesting 2 minutes in terms of the contributions that we're going to be hearing. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Sayyidat was.
Ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, honorable guests, COVID-19 has put economic systems at stake because it has aggravated existing crises, including those that are affecting environment. There are also social and economic consequences, and the pandemic has affected the capacity of countries to address problems, and also affected their abilities to address other challenges such as poverty and unemployment. And in order to address the challenges of the pandemic, the Algerian government has taken a number of measures that have limited or contained the spread of the pandemic, and also alleviated the impact on socioeconomic activities and the impact on environment. And these measures were implemented, taking into account the specificities of each sector. The President of the Republic and all sectors have made strenuous efforts, including financial support, and also to ensure rendering of socioeconomic services and other services to the benefit of citizens. And over the past 2 years, we have been taking account of all precautionary measures imposed to contain the pandemic. We have also made efforts to achieve social justice and to end all discrepancies through investing in projects to improve development in the areas that or regions that support require specific support. We have also harnessed technology to allow all departments and institutions in the public and private sector to continue to work and provide services, and also to sustain their economic activities in order to preserve the living standards for citizens as well as their livelihoods. We have also registered unprecedented reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, especially in industrial sectors, and especially in urban areas. And to continue such measures, we need to have certain conditions, and governments should focus on incentives to the benefit of all people and businesses. And also there should be certain frameworks as deemed appropriate. There should be constructive international partnerships and solidarity, taking into account the capacity of states. And there is also the responsibility of developed countries to provide technical and financial support to developing countries, especially technology transfer and capacity building, as well as sharing successful national expertise. This is in connection with the following: financial mechanisms in order to focus on the environmental dimension of sustainable development. There should also be the rules of transparency and reporting in the context of implementing such policies, and also to assess their effectiveness. There should also be a focus on environmental safety. We should also give attention to energy issues and provide incentives to ensure investment in such sector. There is also the contribution of banks in order to achieve the environmental dimension of sustainable development. There should be capacity building, human capacity building in the sectors to do with the environmental dimension. Therefore, Algeria in the African continent and in the region has supported the Sahel countries to contain the COVID-19 consequences through bilateral and multilateral projects, to promote technical capacity, and through sharing our successful experiences to address desertification and to preserve biodiversity and sustainable use of financial and natural resources. We are convinced that inclusive recovery can only be achieved through comprehensive efforts to ensure that no one is left behind in terms of development. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Distinguished guests, we're moving now to Her Excellency Sherry Rehman, the Federal Minister of Pakistan, on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, at the outset, allow me to appreciate the co-chairs of this leadership dialogue, Germany and Indonesia, for their hard work. First, the group proposes the following actions. First, we must take urgent actions in key COVID-affected sectors such as food, energy, and the tourism and manufacturing sectors to protect the poor and most vulnerable living in the developed countries. Second, it is important to mobilize adequate financial resources to enable recovery, and for that, an additional $4 to $5 trillion are needed to finance recovery in the developing countries. So far, only a fraction of this has been made available. We should utilize all possible channels to mobilize finances. This includes ODA, debt relief, rechanneling of SDRs, expanding the financial facility for the MDBs. And third, we must rethink our patterns of consumption and production. We can certainly produce with greater respect for nature. We can stop the pollution of our lakes, rivers, and oceans. We can produce more with less water and without dangerous chemicals. Technology transfers and technical assistance are also key to achieving these goals, and we must also recall the harmful aspects or impacts of agricultural subsidies and protectionist policies on sustainable food systems. Fourth, recovery efforts should also address the widening technology and digital gap that exists between the developed and developing countries. Fifth, we must work towards promoting the alignment of business practices with the SDGs and the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. Sixth, the pandemic has highlighted the need for better foresight capability and resilience planning in national and international governance. We need to improve market access as well for developing countries and promote their inclusion in the global supply chains. Seventh, and lastly, there is a lot that we can learn from each other. We need to establish a global repository of successful practices. With these remarks, I conclude my submission and thank your excellencies for their patience and time.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your contribution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making my way now to Madame Astrid Schomaker, the Director General for the Environment of the European Union. Madame, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on the subject of Leadership Dialogue 2. And we welcome the key messages and recommendations that were developed under the leadership of Indonesia and Germany that we would like to acknowledge. But But there's a big but. As pointed out by UNEP, only a marginal part of the trillions of dollars pledged for COVID-19 recovery actually has, and I quote, positive green characteristics like reducing greenhouse gas emissions and protecting natural capital. So we are actually here missing an enormous opportunity. It is crucial that the investment flows and stimulus measures that we are now taking contribute to tackling the triple planetary crisis by addressing its root causes. And to do so, what does it mean? They must be geared towards a fundamental transition to sustainable consumption and production and embracing the One Health approach. And can I recall here that the Sustainable Development Report 2021 emphasizes that SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production is one of the goals requiring further coordinated action most urgently. And then also this year, UNEA, we concluded that we must develop new opportunities for inclusive multilateral, multi-stakeholder discussion on how to accelerate sustainable consumption and production in the circular economy. So we would like to make one very practical and actionable recommendation that we think this meeting should come out with, and that is to establish a sustainable consumption and production forum or dialogue under the aegis of ECOSOC and reporting annually to HLPF or the United Nations General Assembly. It should enable a regular global conversation on best practices and policies and identifying and tackling barriers to resource efficiency and circular economy. We believe the establishment of such a forum or dialogue would be a powerful instrument for greening the world's recovery and for reaping the multiple benefits we discussed here that are offered by moving towards a climate-neutral, nature-positive and resource-efficient circular economy. And we should also be as specific as possible in addressing recommendations to various actors. Multilateral development banks need to embed climate and environment risks into credit risk assessment, integrate nature-based solutions. Public institutions need to do that for public procurement. Producers must move to fully sustainable extraction production practices, and we would love to work with the World Business Council and on the Circular Economy Protocol. And consumers need to be guided in their choices. All actors need to come together, but we need a global forum to discuss. Thank you very much.
Madam, thank you very much. A clear call to action. We need a dialogue, a forum, a platform for to have the conversation on sustainable consumption and production. One of the outcomes being put on the table today. Distinguished guests, I've made my way now to the distinguished representative from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. COVID-19 pandemic massively disrupted our economies and livelihood. Over 100 million jobs have been lost or displaced in the formal or informal sector. Over 800 million people in the world faced hunger in 2020. Environmental harmful subsidy amounts to more than 680 billion annually around the world. This means that after only 2 years, these subsidies already canceled $1,090 billion of green spending to be spent over multiple years. The post-COVID-19 recovery agenda is our once in a century opportunity to shift away from business as usual practices and transform our production and consumption patterns on the path of sustainability. Greening our economies also presents opportunities to achieve social objectives. For example, agri-food systems can become more sustainable by enhancing the diversity of our food, empowering farmers by promoting agroecological and regenerative practices also contributes to improving their livelihood. The path to a sustainable and inclusive recovery is highly dependent on financial resources. We have $4.1 trillion nature financing gap by 2030. We need to shift global financial flows toward nature-positive economies as reflected through the work of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. As we embark on post-COVID-19 recovery, let us remember now is the time to take care of the planet, the same way we take care of our health. Options are available to the global community that could simultaneously halt and reverse biodiversity loss, limit climate change, restore degraded ecosystems. Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework represents a historical opportunity to set an example for action on biodiversity and planet while delivering to sustainable livelihood and well-being. Thank you.
Madam, thank you very much for your contribution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making my way to the distinguished representative from the Stockholm Environment Institute, who takes to the floor now to give her contribution and also gives me the opportunity to remind all of us again of the 2-minute time limit on the contribution. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. In this dialogue and meeting in general, we've already heard strong agreement that we need to take action. We must take action because it's our responsibility and our historical opportunity. Let's be more accountable to ourselves and everyone outside of these meeting halls by talking about what we can do, what we will do, and committing to action and follow up after this meeting. In this scientific report, Stockholm+50 Unlocking a Better Future, that our institute prepared for this meeting together with the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, India, we do precisely this. We discuss the big shifts that societies need to embark on, but boil this down to 52 concrete recommendations what specific actors can do. Governments, business, the knowledge community, ourselves, including how to ensure accountability in this process. We're also very pleased to co-develop the action agenda on sustainable value chains that we heard the World Business Council on Sustainable Development discuss. So to use Stockholm+50 and this moment of recovery to really pivot towards sustainable consumption and production and a circular economy, some concrete actions. Governments can focus less on regulating consumer information and nudging and more on truly enabling individuals to choose a more sustainable lifestyle, making them the overwhelmingly easy choice by providing the right infrastructure. Businesses can accelerate the shift from selling goods to selling functions, and governments can enable that by removing any biases in the legal framework. Researchers and the research funders can make a concerted effort to move from the pilot projects and the policy labs here and there to look more at the scaling issue. And as we gather here at Stockholm+50 for a multilateral, multi-stakeholder meeting, governments can develop the global roadmap for circular economy together with business, as suggested at this meeting, and lay out a clear process in the next 12 months. And to also involve people, individuals in this process, governments can raise the profile of sustainable consumption and production by establishing a regular UN forum on sustainable lifestyles to enable international peer learning, elevate action on SDG 12. This forum should convene a global exercise to co-develop pathways to 1.5-degree lifestyles that respond to equity. To finish off, at SEI, we want to be accountable in this decade of action, so we will be a knowledge partner to make a step change on sustainable consumption and production and circular economy and address this critical gap in global governance. Thank you.
Madam, thank you very much. A refreshing change of language. Let's focus on what we all can do instead of what needs to be done. What can we do? Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, I'm handing over now to the distinguished representative from Yatayuasi News, Peru. You have the floor. Please press your button. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. Dear Excellencies and distinguished delegates, on behalf of thousands of young people, I, Luciana Vázquez Rubio, a 18-year-old youth delegate from Peru, want to share our recommendations on behalf of the Children and Youth Major Group of UNEP. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased long-standing inequalities and exposed critical gaps in global governance. We need greater solidarity between countries and also between generations to create effective pathways toward a sustainable and inclusive recovery. We, the youth, are here and we're stepping up. Now, we request member states to deliver meaningful actions. First, I want to quote from the Global Youth Policy Paper that we urge the alignment of all recovery measures with sustainable and environmentally sound investments into green jobs, low-carbon technology, and future-proof sectors. Furthermore, it's crucial to integrate sustainability factors into public procurement processes, taking environmental, economic, and social factors into account. Second, adopt economic strategies to preserve ecosystems, uphold human rights, and minimize and mitigate impacts on communities, especially those who are most affected by the impact of climate change and environmental degradation. Third, address the long-term need for quality education and skills development. This should include accelerating the transition to green jobs, fostering entrepreneurship, and building young people's capacity and skills for active participation in sustainable economies. Finally, the impacts of COVID-19 have not affected us all equally. The same communities that have been most affected by the COVID-19 crisis are the very same who will be impacted by the environmental crisis. We cannot let this happen. This is our moment to stand together in solidarity, commit to bold and decisive actions, and hold each other accountable to deliver the solutions our world needs now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another fiery young voice, reminding us that the young people are here and stepping up and asking us the question, are we? Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I have made my way to His Excellency Simonas Gentvilas, the Minister of Environment from Lithuania. You have the floor, Your Excellency.
Thank you for the word. Dear Excellencies, first of all, a big appreciation for the UNEP, Sweden, Kenya, Indonesia, and Germany for hosting this dialogue. We are facing triple crisis, actually not only COVID, but inflationary crisis and war in Ukraine, which has made the global insecurity and recession ongoing. And the question is actually, for this, the answer is not defragmentation, but globalization and multilateral decisions, where we have to put rule of law on agenda again. But in respect of current discussion, I would like to pinpoint the three conclusions or suggestions. First of all, since 50 years ago, our governments have become stronger, but multinational companies have become even stronger. So we have to put the taxonomy, ESG reporting, and green finance channeling on agenda multilaterally and on the same page for everybody, so that the scope 3, scope 2, scope 1 channeling of finances would be direct without social negative externalizations. Secondly, we already know that jobs in green economies create more jobs than in oil and gas. So we have to decarbonize our economies and our industries. We have to set the standard for global carbon tax, and I know OECD is already working hard on it. We also have to work on carbon border adjustment mechanisms, also continentally and internally inside trade unions. And lastly, the governments are big purchasing powers. We have to set standards for green purchasing agreements and set the standards how we as a governments buy things and how we can influence the impacted sectors. Those are my conclusions. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. Three very clear inclusions, three very clear opportunities to leverage the multilateral space to make progress. Distinguished guests, I am making my way to His Excellency Abdul Momen, the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm humbled to speak at this leadership dialogue. We must focus on aligning our recovery efforts with environmental sustainability, conservation of natural habitat, and climate resilience in line with the SDGs and Paris Accord. This leadership dialogue can take note of few urgent actions to achieve these objectives. First, the current global food system is easily exposed to the external shocks like COVID-19. We must rethink our food production and consumption pattern. Bangladesh is ready to collaborate to build food banks at regional and global scale to protect most vulnerable people. Second, micro, small, and medium enterprises have a critical role to play in inclusive recovery. They require our assistance in adopting innovative and green technology. In Bangladesh, the government is actively promoting circular economy, including in the garment and textile industry. Third, we need to increase the investment in climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience, especially for the most vulnerable countries. The world must come up with that facilitate emergence of new low-carbon and technology-based solutions. Bangladesh has adopted a green recovery plan. Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, developed by Bangladesh, will concurrently grow the economy and enhance resilience by mobilizing finance and technology for renewable energy. We aspire to achieve an ambitious target. However, climate-vulnerable countries like Bangladesh have resource constraints, both money and technology. The developed nation must mobilize pledge finance immediately. Fourth, biodiversity loss is a direct threat to lives and livelihood of human populations, and we need to stop natural habitat and biodiversity loss to avoid future pandemic. In Bangladesh, we have included a comprehensive approach to environmental conservation management in the national environment policy. Fifth, preferential access to technologies, including emerging digital solutions for vulnerable and South, need to be ensured as part of the just transition. Finally, like the COVID-19 pandemic, the current planetary emergencies of climate change, flooding, erosion of river, destruction of ecosystems, nature loss and pollution do not obey national or political borders. Therefore, we must overcome the dichotomy between technology and economic interests and join hands for international cooperation towards a sustainable and inclusive future for all, irrespective of ethnicity, religion, race, color, gender, and political divide. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. 5 concrete, clear actions that can be taken. Distinguished guests, I'm noticing the applause are getting softer and softer. We can be a bit more generous, I think, and we can keep the energy up as we do so. Thank you very much. That sounds a little bit better. All right, so I am now in front of His Excellency Washington Varela Salazar, the President of the Commission on Biodiversity and Natural Resources of Ecuador. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. That I come from the green Amazon, which is really the lungs of the world, and we really must preserve these lungs. 15 million people have died around the world because of the pandemic, and has damaged the economy as well. 35,642 to date have died, and more than 3 million have been vaccinated, with 33% coverage of the world. This shows that Ecuador's economy is emerging and recovering. The COVID-19 pandemic means that we can open up negotiations about pollution and the levels of consumerism at the moment, with our systems that imperil the world and are unsustainable. And at the heart of them, they do not have life, but a capitalist logic of accumulation of capital and acculturation. Faced with these crises, climate change, COVID-19, and others, thankfully, we have local models of sustainable ancestral agriculture that are virtuous and resilient, and they have shown themselves to be self-sufficient, respectful of biodiversity. They meet the requirements for health and food security, and they also are sufficient for those living in large cities. We have a framework of standards that use the sustainable methods, and they encourage development and research towards innovation and innovative practices and systems. And so, in light of the differentiated and fair approach, I believe that a fair approach to the countries of the South is necessary, especially for young professionals. We must strengthen the productive matrix and a spirit of solidarity between people. I agree with the young people who are participating in today's meeting that international cooperation has been devoted to only forcing things up from the top rather than encouraging those from the bottom up. It is important for communities, for nationalities, for people to intervene directly. We must give work to the young people, and in this way, we will help them develop their skills. I believe that this is fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, a call to action to move away from top-down and increasingly create the opportunity for bottom-up approaches as well, and the deliberate inclusion of young people once again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with the distinguished representative from the Green Climate Fund. Madam, you have the floor. Please press.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this dialogue. Alignment of COVID recovery and sustainable development with climate action is critical. Climate change is affecting agri-food systems and natural resources globally, accelerating hunger and poverty. OECD countries have undertaken unprecedented fiscal and monetary measures, but only 21% of their total recovery spending is on green measures, while annual support for fossil fuels continue to dominate. Meanwhile, developing countries face poorer prospects with the pandemic compounding pre-existing challenges. Despite these challenges, there is an opportunity for transformation and innovation. Innovation in finance, policy, and technology that address climate change and contribute to ending hunger and poverty. It can transform agri-food systems and ultimately economies and societies, especially as part of green recovery. The Green Climate Fund, the world's largest climate fund, uses innovative financing to jumpstart low-emission and climate-resilient markets in the agricultural sector, among others. Our mandate is to catalyze finance, public and private, for transformative projects in developing countries. For example, through the Inclusive Green Financing Initiative, GCF is empowering African national and local banks to direct funds to help smallholder farmers in Africa cope with climate change while also reducing farming emissions. Our financing of US $114 million will support a regional program to enhance coordination, knowledge sharing, and innovation in the region. Working with IFAD, UNCCD, GEF, and the Pan-African Agency of the Great Green Wall, the program also highlights the importance of partnerships and the synergy between climate, biodiversity, land degradation, while looking also at the SDGs. These types of innovative approaches and complementary and coherent partnerships are keys to accelerating a climate-resilient green recovery towards long-term sustainability. We must act urgently to increase both the speed and amount of finance flows towards greener transitions to avoid the catastrophic impact of climate change. Please know that you can count on us.
Please note that you can count on us. Thank you very much, Madam, for your contribution. Distinguished guests, I'm looking and opening the floor now for the distinguished representative from Women for a Change, and would love to give them the floor. Madam, the floor is yours.
Greetings, Honorable Excellencies and delegates. I'm speaking on behalf of the Women Measures Group to the United Nations. My name is Zonziwo from the NGO Women for a Change in Cameroon. This week, the Women Measure Group hosted an associated Stockholm+50 event bringing together feminists from all continents, including many countries that are trying to recover from the COVID pandemic. In my region, thousands of women have lost their livelihoods due to COVID, climate change, as well as armed conflicts. Similarly, the war in Ukraine is impacting all countries' food security. In the background paper for this session, it says that young people, women, rural communities, and indigenous people play a central role in sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery processes. Indeed, we should. But women, girls, and gender-diverse people have been disproportionately impacted. We need to understand and address the systemic and historic inequalities that are the cause, including colonialism, militarism, patriarchy, and extractivism. What we need is a shift away from the current dominant systems of oppression, exploitation of people and planet. As feminists, we call on decision makers to divest from fossil fuels, stop the wars, and redirect budgets to invest in care and in equitable recovery. ignite reparations for both institutionalized racism and climate damage to advance environmental and economic justice. We call on this assembly to commit to a loss and damage fund, ensure women and feminist organizations have a permanent seat at your decision-making tables and are implementers of your environmental and climate policies, centering the leadership of Global South women, girls, and gender-diverse people to influence these strategic spaces. Protect women environmental defenders by implementing the resolution on human rights to a healthy, safe, and clean environment that was adopted only a few months ago. Advance a feminist vision for a decolonial Green Deal to shift towards regenerative economies that center care for people and planet and ensure women's human rights and a peaceful and healthy planet for all. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We thank you for the contribution that puts a sharp focus once again on women. Distinguished guests, I am on my way to the distinguished representative of the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, dear colleagues. At the onset of the pandemic, the world spoke about an opportunity for a new normal. But 2 years into this crisis, we have fallen even deeper and deeper than ever into business as usual to the detriment of people and the planet. We failed to learn from our previous mistakes and failures. We have shown little to no readiness to change and to transform, and we have come to a point of wide divide at all levels and deepened inequalities. The only way to truly rebuild and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and other compounding crises is to do it in a sustainable and inclusive manner. This requires transformational change at a systems level, meaning we need to change not only what we do, but how we do it. So allow me to share 3 key recommendations. First, the people most affected by COVID-19, who were also the most vulnerable and marginalized before the pandemic, must be front and center in the recovery. This includes young people who are not only disproportionately affected, but are also the ones who will inherit the consequences of the decisions that made today and your action or inaction. Despite this fact, young people, especially young women, are often sidelined or excluded from decision-making. Sustainable and inclusive recovery depends on young people's engagement and their ownership as full-fledged partners and not as beneficiaries. If the diversity of our communities are reflected in the tables that make decisions on the COVID-19 recovery, then we will make better and more inclusive decisions for people and for the planet. Second, we must ensure that we practice what we preach. We put money where our mouth is by investing in key sectors that are pivotal to ensuring positive transformational and systemic change, especially green, digital, and care economies. This also includes investments in universal quality and relevant education and training, decent jobs, and protection, social protection as enablers and accelerators for an inclusive and sustainable recovery. In doing so, we must ensure that money trickles down to the grassroots and that youth and community-led solutions are adequately resourced. Lastly, digital development and connectivity is key. We have seen how the pandemic has made the unconnected lose their access to jobs, incomes, and education overnight. Out of the 4.9 billion who have access to connectivity, hundreds of millions still struggle with its affordability and unstable quality. Young people are demanding action on protecting digital rights, including the rights to be connected. They are calling on governments to build sustainable digital ecosystems and businesses to adopt rights-respecting technologies that cause no harm to people and to the planet. So I hope at Stockholm+50 we can all commit towards a world where the interests and needs of younger and future generations are valued over short-term political gain and profit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam, for your contribution. A refreshing take where young people are seen as partners and not just beneficiaries. Distinguished guests, I am making my way to His Excellency Duarte Cordeiro, the Minister of Environment and Climate Action of Portugal. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Allow me to congratulate Indonesia and Germany for co-sharing this dialogue, as well as UNEP Secretariat for organizing this session with the involvement of all stakeholders. The global health crisis highlighted the close connection between nature and human beings, and how thin is the balance of a healthy nature and the well-being of humans. COVID-19 made even more evident our dependency on biodiversity. COVID pandemic was devastating for the world as we know it, but gave us the opportunity to stop, to rethink, and to learn that we can move forward in a different way of doing things. The business as usual scenario is no longer an option, as we do not have the time or the capacities to deal with the tremendous challenge we have in front of us if we don't change things. The consciousness of opportunity to change has created the urgency of an energy and digital transition. Energy, digital, transport are three of the sectors where rapid change is needed and where the greatest opportunities can arise. The war in Ukraine and the energy crisis increased the urgency of an energy renewable transition. We have in our hands the capability, but mainly the responsibility of designing and implementing a new way of living, a new world economic model that is just, more inclusive, more respectful of our planetary boundaries. A model that shall prioritize endogenous resources, but use them in a balanced way. A model that puts people at the center of our concerns, but without forgetting how important it's to live in peace with nature. Technology will be the game changer for these transitions to happen, and the way we spread it around the world, cooperating and establishing relevant partnerships, is the most important discussion we can have. In Portugal, we are strongly committed with climate neutrality and these transitions, particularly on energy and mobility. Strong efforts and investments make it the center of the recovery investment plans are being made. For Portugal, energy transition is not only about shutting coal power plants and boost renewable energies, but to do this transition environmentally friendly and making the best use of nature-based solutions to complement or replace the traditional grey infrastructures. By restoring nature, we can mitigate and adapt to climate change and simultaneously improve public health, reduce air pollution, save energy and water, and safeguard original landscape. Once more, this is only possible with a strong sense of urgency, interdependency, and partnership. Each one of us, in its own capacity, has a role to play in this path. We have the capacity to recreate the world where we live, to reinvent it, and to try to stop this emergency, giving future generations the hope of a better world. You can count with Portugal to be an active partner in facing these challenges and build bridges to make this recovery just and balanced. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. An opportunity to recreate and reinvent our world, and to do it while we're building bridges at the same time. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am standing close by to Her Excellency Monica Medina, the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs of the United States. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the co-chairs and to UNEP for hosting this important dialogue. Now more than ever, building a sustainable and inclusive recovery from COVID-19 is essential for the health of people and our planet. First, we must acknowledge the pandemic is still with us. We must double down our efforts to vaccinate and treat COVID across the world to prevent more deaths and more deadly waves of new COVID variants. But looking ahead, a sustainable recovery demands that we strengthen the global health security architecture that protects us all. To do this, we must leverage on a One Health approach to address the inherent links between our human, animal, and environmental health. This will help us better prevent, detect, and rapidly respond to future outbreaks. Health and environment are inextricably linked. Indeed, we now know a healthy people require a healthy planet. There are a few lines of effort which we see as critical to this mission. First, the United States is working hard to meet President Biden's ambitious target to protect or conserve at least 30% of American lands and waters and at least 30% of our ocean by 2030. Towards this end, we encourage governments to join our ocean conservation pledge to conserve 30% of their own national waters. Please let me know if you are willing to join the countries that have already made this very important promise. Next, to end the scourge of global plastic pollution, we need ambition. The U.S. is helping to encourage ambitious country-driven commitments. As we embark on a global plastic pollution agreement, we need all voices heard. We are providing close to $7 million to UNEP, to the Secretariat at UNEP to work with certain developing countries on capacity building as they develop their national action plans and good practices to address plastic pollution. And we can learn so much from many of the countries that are already ahead of us in the United States on this very difficult challenge. Next, and key for healthy societies, is tackling the threat posed by air pollution. Air pollution leads to over 7 million premature deaths a year. Country and regional level action saves lives, and it reduces emissions. We cannot stand by as people continue to suffer because their air is not safe to breathe. To close, I must emphasize that a sustainable and inclusive recovery is not fully possible while Russia's aggressive war of choice against Ukraine rages on. The tragic human toll is unbearable. The toll of environmental and economic destruction to the Ukraine, too, is brutal and omnipresent, including the toll to soil and waters of Europe's breadbasket. The world needs to hold Russia to account. We will continue to stand with the people of Ukraine. We will continue to stand for nature, for peace, and for healthy societies. And we will continue to work with our partners and allies in this room and everywhere where we can find them to advance health, climate, and environmental security to strive for a truly, truly sustainable and inclusive recovery. I thank you very much for the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Distinguished guests, I'm making my way to His Excellency Daniel Zadra, the Regional Minister of Austria. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm here as a politician, but I'm also here as a caring father. I have a daughter. She's 5 years old. So more than half of her life, she has been dealing with COVID-19. And this has shaped her. She knows how to use an FFP2 mask, and she knows what the lockdown means. COVID-19 is routine to her. And that shows exactly how adaptable human beings are. If we do not use this power of adaptation now and take the right measures to actively fight climate change, it might soon be too late. Strong and effective multilateralism, I'm convinced, is the only approach to deal with the multiple crises. Our Austrian national goal is to become climate neutral by 2040, and in order to achieve this, we will have to literally change everything. And I know that's not easy. Austria set a clear focus on greening and climate action in our stimulus packages to recover from the pandemic. But now I would like to give a particular example. One of the tools Secretary General talked about yesterday. One of the most challenging sectors in Austria is, like I think in many other countries, mobility. And so we have to give the people an alternative to cars, no matter whether they use petrol or electricity. And therefore, we are investing in the public transportation sector a lot. Last year, after 15 years of discussion, we were finally able to introduce the so-called national climate ticket. 3 euros a day gets you free access to all the public transportation all over Austria. And we also came up with a 1-month trial ticket to get back the passengers we lost through the pandemic. The success is really measurable. The next step is to raise the capacity of buses and trains, and the EU COVID-19 Reconstruction Fund is helping us to decarbonize the fleet. We all know that it will require significant investments, and an important share of those will need to be mobilized through the private sectors. So investment flows for recovery must be aligned with climate, biodiversity, and environmental policies and objectives. And this will also have a stimulus effect on the environment. We have to get the job done for the sake of our planet and for the sake of our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. we have to get the job done. And again, a very practical example of what is happening in Austria. Distinguished guests, making my way to the distinguished representative from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. There you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm here honored to speak on behalf of the three Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, and WFP. The COVID-19 pandemic, disaster, the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, conflicts, the Ukraine war, and the economic fallout continue to take a heavy toll on agriculture, food security, and rural development. To respond and build forward better from COVID-19, we need to transform our agri-food system for them to become more efficient, more inclusive, more resilient, and sustainable. This transformation can deliver equitable economic opportunities and access to healthy diets, especially the poorest and the most food insecure communities, those most vulnerable to today's multiple crises. We should prioritize sustainable policies and practices, scale up finance and investment, ensuring that people's needs, especially the most vulnerable, are at the center of agri-food system transformation. We are joining forces to protect, restore, and sustainably manage productive land and aquatic ecosystem, leveraging the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Our joint program for the Sahel, in response to the challenge of COVID-19 conflict and climate change, supports 854,000 vulnerable people, mainly women and youth. And as referred by Ambassador Sacco from African Union, we, FAO, WFP, and IFAD, collaborate with African Union and African countries to develop a recovery plan and avoid food crisis. On this, what we propose. First, to reinforce One Health. As it has been said from previous speakers, we need to safeguard human, plant, animal, and environment health, and they are interconnected. We should promote green, blue, and climate-resilient agri-food approaches and nature-positive solutions, optimize inclusive access to innovation, technologies, and digital solutions. We are all agri-food system actors. Together, we can build a path to sustainability. Let's move to action and at scale. Count on the Rome-based agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move to action and let's do it at scale. Distinguished guests, we are going to go to the panel very shortly, but before we do, allow me to give the floor to the distinguished representative from Togo Welfare. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much. I'm taking the floor on behalf of Well Have to Go, and I'm also facilitator of the NGO group at UNEP. I'd like to stress, first of all, our gratitude for the convening of this meeting. As we are aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has killed millions of people across the world, and no nation has been spared. The pandemic continues to have a serious effect on jobs and on the increase in poverty. We would like to share with you recommendations for concrete action. First of all, to stop vaccine colonization, to introduce healthcare for all in setting aside imposing 1% windfall tax on those companies that have benefited from the pandemic, to cancel the debt of developing countries and countries in transition, to invest more in the public health sector in developing countries and economies in transition, to revisit Agenda 2030 in order to integrate recovery, to invest more in prevention of conflicts rather than in their resolution, to minimize the vulnerability of women, children, and other vulnerable groups to supply a legal and institutional basis for this action on the part of all the stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, we have, since 1972, have been waging a fight on all fronts in our society where the environment figures prominently. Our society is aware of issues and is committed to ensure follow-up of Stockholm+50. We, in our capacity as an NGO, we are committed to recovery of ecosystems. I'd like to remind you of this assembly that we stand ready. As civil society, we are capable of stepping up this work, these initiatives. I thank you.
Again, civil society coming back into sharp focus, reinforcing many of the key messages that came out of Leadership Dialogue 1 as well. Now, distinguished guests, the final contribution in this round, as I yield the floor to the distinguished representative from the United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I have also imbibed the spirit of Stockholm+50. So I'm not going to talk about what needs to be done. By this stage, we all know what needs to be done. I am going to talk about what me, as the head of UNITAR, promising in Sweden to do over the next 2 years, because that's the remit of learning and changing people's attitudes and behaviors is the remit of our work. And what I pledge to do over the next 2 years is to use technology, and we've learned during the COVID phase to use technology much better, we reach 370,000 people a year with learning outcomes. And I promise that over the next 2 years, we'll reach more than 500,000 people. So that's my first contribution of how we as heads of UN entities will do things differently and better. The second thing I will do, learning from the COVID experience, where misinformation, disinformation, the vaccine politics so confuse the world that we need to change that, and how in the area of health we will focus and try and see what we can do to dispel the misinformation that goes on. Third, we will also use our satellite. We are the UN Satellite Center, so how we'll use the UN Satellite Center to inform countries better in all these areas, whether it's flood warning and use of artificial intelligence, or coastal zone erosion, or every aspect of the environment and health. So that's what, I see my time is up, so this is what I will do, and this is what I will bring as my organization will do over the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a personal pledge that really brings back sharp focus to the opportunity of asking the question, what will I do from here on? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making my way back onto the stage because I do want to give my panelists an opportunity just to react and respond to what they've heard before we go into our second set of panelists. Dominic, you've been listening for over an hour, and I'm sure you've been moved by some of the things that you've heard. What are you most energized by? Having listened in a minute, what are you most energized by that you think really should be shaping what we do next?
Well, thank you so much. And it is a wonderful innovation to have this dialogue. I'm very energized by how you've drawn in the crowd and got people engaged in the debate. So thank you for a beautiful piece of moderating there.
Thank you.
We've heard very clearly, you know, jobs and skills and youth and innovation and transformation and a kind of a systems change approach. That gives me great heart that the process that we went through for the Stockholm Action Agenda with our colleagues at the Stockholm Environment Institute hit the buttons. And I'd be very, very keen to take those things further. That skills and innovation compact between businesses, large and small, to really drive home the employment opportunities of tomorrow in this transformation. This circularity protocol, and I'm delighted if we can follow up some of these conversations with some from the audience who are interested in that, to unlock the value at scale for all of the creation that can be done across those value chains. And we heard also about accountability and transparency, and that accountability and transparency mechanism so that you can see what the businesses, large and small, are doing to tackle these problems and see it clearly, and applaud those who are making progress and ask those who don't seem to be making progress, what are you doing? So those three areas of the Stockholm Action Agenda I felt came through very clearly, and I really appreciate the discussion and dialogue. Thank you.
Dominic, thank you very much. Really powerful reflections. Let's build on that. Reem, let's bring your voice into these reflections. What are you energized by what you've heard, and how does that shape what you think should be the priority of what we walk out of with in this leadership dialogue?
I think that we should realize that we have been discussing the environment for 50 years now, officially. And by the looks of it, when all of these nations, all these stakeholders are here in the same room discussing, trying to come up with solutions, we know that there is a will. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been here in the first place. The question is, how do we take this will and put it into sustainable and activated action? We need to have commitments and accountability when it comes to actions and solutions. Because many of these meetings, many of them, unfortunately, end up with speeches, panels, and tokenism all over the place. Promises that are not kept because there's no accountability. And I was very energized. I was very glad to hear the different perspectives that were covered, pretty much all of the sectors involved that should be named in this conversation. But there needs to be accountability. And so we need to commit and to make the promises and keep them.
It's such a beautiful arc that you're painting for us to say, for us to move from will to action, the key is accountability, and that's what actually enables that translation. Reem, thank you very much. Gonzalo, let's bring your voice in. Again, listening deeply, what's energized you, what's really moved you in this conversation, and what do you think we should do about it as we leave?
Well, thank you, Noise. And yeah, I feel definitely I hear a strong alignment on expectations, not only coming out of COVID, but also coming out of these 50 years that you were referring, that there are 50 years of evidence that I'm 50 years old. So it resonates a lot of my personal life. But definitely brings me a lot of frustration, makes me feel sad, but also encourages me a lot. I think that we're now confronting the era of the consequences of inaction, consequences of not having enough accountability. And now I'm speaking also, as the Austrian representative refers to, I'm also speaking as a father, I'm speaking as an entrepreneur, business entrepreneur from Latin America, and also as a high-level champion for COP25. We have evidence also of the capacity of acting. In the business sector, we have been developing the capacity of not only committing, but also acting. If we see what had happened in the last years, through the Race to Zero, through the Race to Resilience, through G-Funds, there is evidence that we can do that. Please take us into accountability. It's now up to you. It's the moment for activating the ambition to push us for harder commitments. It's the moment to kill the greenwashing. This is it. And we have to do the same thing when it comes to SDG 12. We have to do the same thing when it comes to circular economy. I'm celebrating that. We have to do that also when it comes to biodiversity. There's no way we can progress, we can prosper as humanity if we don't tackle that. And of course, we have to do that also with solidarity in the center and providing green jobs for the younger generation.
Gonzalo, so much that you said and so powerful. And just to lift out of that, I heard three beautiful A's: activating ambition with accountability. And I think you've articulated that so amazingly well. Ambassador Sako, we're closing off this part of the dialogue with you. how have you been energized by the conversation and the contributions from the floor? And what do you think we should be doing as we leave Stockholm+50?
Allow me, first of all, to comment the way you're carrying on your moderation. It's very good, very interactive, and the format of this high-level event is very important because we had the chance to share lessons with other parts of other regions of the globe, and this is very rich. So with all we gather here, we see that the problems are common, and we know the shocks, we know the grassroots of those shocks. So now the time is for us to advance if we want to attain the goals of Agenda 2030 for globally, and also our Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. This is the time for Africa to really rebuild its economy. At times when you have a crisis, you have an opportunity. And this is an opportunity for us in Africa to feed Africa. Because this continent has 60% of the world arable land. Unfortunately, these potential are not really untapped. We have water, we have all the things to feed ourselves and to feed the world. So as a leader on this agriculture, food security, I appeal to all my fellow brothers and sisters that are here that we should really take it seriously, because the two shocks that we had, both COVID-19 and this Ukraine, showed us that the way forward for Africa food security is the sovereignty. It is food reserve. COVID-19 showed us we could not import rice in our traditional market, which is Asia. The war in Europe showed us that with Ukraine and Russia, represents 40% of the cereal production worldwide, we cannot have access to cereal. So I think it is time for us in Africa to take our responsibility. I thank you.
I thank you, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, can we give my panelists a big round of applause, please? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I think I can invite you now to descend the stage. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your listening posture. And really, thank you for giving us some practical, tangible things as we think about an inclusive and sustainable recovery. You may exit the stage to my left. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to welcome onto stage our next set of panelists who are going to take on questions before we come to the floor once again. Professor David Boyd, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, joins me on stage. Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, the CEO and Chairperson of the Global Environmental Facility, thank you very much, also joins me on stage. And I know there's a quick changing of microphones happening in the corner, so please do bear with us if we are taking a moment. But Mr. Rodriguez coming up on stage now. Ms. Joan Carling, the Executive Director of the Indigenous Peoples Rights International, is also making her way up onto stage. And last but certainly not least in the conversation is Mr. Yanis Potonik, the co-chair of the International Resources Panel and Special Advisor on Sustainability to the European Commissioner for the Environment, Oceans and Fisheries. Thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get right into the conversation. And Professor, I'm going to pick up on a theme that we've been hearing bits about, and maybe now the opportunity to bring it into sharp focus. How can the human right to a clean environment play a role in supporting transformations of economic sectors with legal, climate, nature, or pollution footprints? How do we bring focus to that question in this moment?
Right, that's a great question, Nosy. And ladies and gentlemen, Nosy, we are living in a global environmental emergency. We must act with urgency with the climate disruption, the collapse of biodiversity, pervasive pollution. You know, we're talking about building back better from the pandemic. Pollution has killed more people in the last 2 years than COVID-19. 18 million premature deaths. And while wealthy governments have spent tens of trillions of dollars addressing the pandemic, they can't find $50 billion to provide clean cook stoves to people in the global south. They haven't fulfilled fulfilled their commitment to provide $100 billion in climate finance for countries in the global south. We should feel outrage about the environmental injustices of today's world, but we should also feel optimism. Last fall, the United Nations Human Rights Council recognized for the first time the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for everyone, everywhere in this world. That means clean air to breathe. Thank you. Clean air to breathe, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainably produced food, a safe climate, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and non-toxic environments where everyone can live, work, study, and play. And for too long, for 50 years, governments have treated these foundations of life as options. But a human rights-based approach ensures that we treat them as obligations. And we know that human rights can achieve the kinds of transformations we must have in today's world. The abolitionists used human rights to end the colonial system of slavery. And so the right to a healthy environment can be a catalyst for changes to transform today's economy. We need to phase out fossil fuels and replace them with renewable energy as quickly as humanly possible. We need to shift to a circular economy. We need to shift to a economy that redirects $1.8 trillion in subsidies that destroy nature and use those for sustainable activities. We also need to end deforestation. And ladies and gentlemen, if we do not harness the power of the right to a healthy environment, we will not achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We will betray our children. And so let's harness the right to a healthy environment to bring about the just and sustainable future for everyone on this beautiful blue-green planet that we are so fortunate to share. Thank you very much.
From options to obligation, and such a powerful articulation. Thank you very much for your energy. Anyone is allowed to stand on the stage if you so wish to do so. Thank you very much for that. Mr. Rodriguez, let me come to you. We have been talking about financing in bits and pieces of the conversation in the last 2 days, and we know that we need to massively mobilize and scale up financing for development and the environment. We heard also from Ambassador Sacco that we need to align public and private portfolios to the SDGs, to the NDCs, to the 2020 biodiversity targets. What is your one big message to the funds and to the foundations who want to support and align their funding strategies, their financing strategies with a healthy planet?
Oh, thank you so much. My single most important message to all of them is to recognize that all of the funds that are out there can be 2, 3 times, 10 times the size there are now. That will not be enough if we continue polluting the environment, destroying nature, and contributing to climate change. There won't be enough money in the planet to solve the triple crisis if we continue investing way more resources in activities that destroy nature and contribute to climate change than what we invest in reverting that process. And I totally agree with David that at the end of the day, and we can, in a very simplistic manner, say, well, this is lack of political coherence, evidently, but at the end of the day, it's a problem of principles and values. And it is not just or enough to have the UN recognize a healthy environment as a fundamental human right. It's a matter of understanding that we need to see that at the level of every single country's constitution.
Yeah.
At every single country's constitution. The funding is an effort to catalyze social and political processes. It's a way by which we can redesign the social contract that we humans has been able to agree upon all of our different societies. It's a matter of principles and value. And I think that that element is extremely important because the work that we do with all the many different funds is relevant. But we need to really understand that our effort needs to address the need for nations to understand that it's in their own self-interest to protect the natural capital the same way we protect the human and the financial capital. A world that is net zero emissions, nature positive, pollution free cannot be achieved if we don't do the right base approach at the global level. And here we got the experts that can tell us. That element is fundamental in what we do. Yes, so it's not a matter of putting more money and having more impact with the limited resources, which is something that we all work on a daily basis, but it's really understanding how the funds can trigger those processes where we redefine the social contract that we have at the country level.
Yeah, and that's a very refreshed perspective, the opportunity for us to look at financing and funds as a way of reconfiguring the social contract and actually using that as a tool for a specific outcome. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure there might be some additional ideas building on that. But maybe let me come to Madame Carling. And I mean, on this note of being innovative and thinking out of the box, we know that innovative solutions do exist amongst indigenous peoples and local communities. In this moment, perhaps you might share an example of an innovation that can be brought to the table for a healthy planet.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me first put us in the context of where I'm coming from.
Yes.
Just to present that indigenous peoples are more than 460 million, which is 6% of the global population. But we protect 60 to 80% of biodiversity. And that is not by coincidence. That is because we have a sustainable lifestyle. That is because we nurture the environment, not just for us, but for the future generations. It is because we have values of cooperation, of solidarity, and working together in a reciprocal relations with nature. That is what we are bringing. That is what we want, a shift in our thinking. Because right now, production and consumption is dictated not by the need, not of our need to sustain the resources. It is dictated by profit. It is dictated by the narrow interest of the few. That is how consumption and production is proceeding. That is why we are abusing nature. We are extracting and exploiting nature not to support people. That's not the framework anymore. So we need to rethink. We need to rethink and put sustainability, people, intergenerational use of our resources. My question is, are we serious about this? Let's stop the talk and do the walk in conserving nature for a healthy planet, for healthy people.
Thank you very much, Madame Carling. Thank you very much. Again, a passionate plea to go beyond the talk and really start walking the walk. Dr. Pochanik, as I come to you, again, I want to tap into your role as co-chair of the International Resources Panel. You have been doing the work of highlighting the imbalance and inequity in resource use and sustainability. How do we address this imbalance in your view? And how do we do it from a systems perspective? And maybe as a final layer to that, what do you see as the role of sufficiency in all of that?
Actually, John has said everything, but let me put it in the scientific context. From the IRP work, we know basically three things. One is that use of natural resources is driving triple planetary crisis. Second, we know that we are in terrible trajectory. So in the last 50 years, we have tripled consumption of materials, which is everything extracted from the earth. And according to our estimates, we will double it again until 2060 if we will continue like that. And the third is that this is linked to deep inequalities, because high-income countries consume a big share of the benefits, while low-income countries are burdened with the negative impacts of extraction and processing. So the goal must be using fewer natural resources while aspiring to increase societal well-being, in particular, of course, in low-income countries. So where is the problem? The problem is that basically humans have never separated economic growth from ever-rising demand use for resources, which is obviously difficult, but it's possible. Just imagine any sustainable city which people appreciate. So mobility, it's well managed. It's provided with the locally produced food. So it's actually compact but yet balanced neighborhoods, which is exactly all the areas which we need from the resource use to address. But where is the problem? And here I'm going to your question of the sufficiency. In our international efforts, we are only focusing on cleaning the supply side. So we are not honestly answering anything which is linked to the demand side. But cleaning the supply side of the wrong economic model will not make this economic model right.
Sure.
So we need to ask actually also consumption-related questions, which is leading me, which is the only possible way that we address in the right way also the questions of responsibility and equity. So resource efficiency, in particular in high-income countries, needs to be coupled with the sufficiency questions. So we should simply stop ignoring the wastefulness of our production and consumption. So, for example, if you decarbonize the steel, but you use that decarbonized steel in underused cars and underused housing, so you haven't done the trick. To basically conclude, I think that IRP science is very clear. So we need system change-based approach. We must empower public policy leaders with knowledge to translate these system change visions into their concrete policies, into investment structures, to avoid these conflicting policy decisions, which are currently pretty much the name of the game, and future lock-ins, which are basically hindering the transformation. So our future should be based on maximizing well-being, on maximizing, optimizing humans' needs instead of sectors' profits, and making our economies and making our societies actually more resilient is the best defense to protect ourselves against any future crisis. But the last sentence, if we want to avoid extinction of the elephants in the nature, we first need to extinct elephants in these rooms.
Sure. I think that deserves a round of applause. So, to my panelists again, we're holding you captive for at least an hour as we open up the conversation. So, if we want to ensure that we stop the extinction of elephants, we need to first ensure that we are bringing to extinction the elephants in this room. Now, if anybody's tweeting, if anybody's lifting sound bites, that is certainly probably the tweet of the day today. So, distinguished guests, I'm going to start off and go make my way to His Excellency Ibrahim Munir, the Minister of Environment from Libya, who is going to take the floor to give his contribution. And as we open up this round, allow me to kindly please remind all of us of the 2-minute time allocation. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Allow me at the outset to thank the government of Sweden for organizing this event. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 proved the weak international system and the inability of different countries to have access to medications and drugs and vaccines. I would like to recall some points that I believe are important to point out. The African Union, when it joined G20, would have a motivating impact, as it will voice the concerns of the African countries equally, and that will also help us to be better prepared to any crisis in the future. The establishment of a COVID-19 fund by the support of the international organizations and private sector would help accelerate early recovery from COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, I've always asked myself, is there enough political power by the countries of the world to realize COVID-19 recovery, as unfortunately world leaders make wrong decisions. So my question is, to whom those politicians are accountable, especially those corrupt politicians? And I hope that there will be a recommendation to establish a mechanism to review decisions taken by such political leaders. Perhaps if there is a neutral entity of the United Nations that receives complaints or reports of the actions of these political reports would be a better solution. I belong to the third world. We suffer from lack of transparency and lack of expression, and these ails help those political leaders. Once again, I repeat that there must be a mechanism to hold political leaders accountable around the world.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am making my way to Her Excellency Ariel Martinez, and I believe on her behalf, of course, she is the Undersecretary of Political Coordination of the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries of Argentina. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to have this exchange, and we are very grateful for the opportunity to hear your different ideas and perspectives on these issues. For us, the pandemic of COVID-19 has shown and has exacerbated the existing inequalities between developed and developing countries. These spaces for multilateralism should serve to work in a coordinated and joint fashion on swift, sustainable and inclusive recovery to reduce the gap between our countries. The challenges of food systems that are imposed upon us by our emergence from the pandemic, as well as climate change, force us to find solutions that are not going to limit food supply. In addition to the problems of global food security as a result of a lack of access to food in an unequal world, we should not add further problems relating to supply or availability. The world is more vulnerable than we thought in the field of the supply of food, and this has been shown by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The food production systems fulfill a fundamental role in this process, and nothing that we do should result in less food production. The countries of our region are producers and exporters of food, and we have taken on a transcendental role in the field of food security. At the same time, we are global environmental creditors because of our low impact and low contributions to global greenhouse gas emissions. This is why we give priority to policies of adaptation and intensification of sustainable production. The planet needs more food for more people. We need more producers, and we must put an end to the inertia and the concentration of production of food. The challenges are pressing not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of distribution, and we must use them to not use these to increase the gap between rich and poor, but rather to reduce them. These goals must be achieved by working together towards a fair transition without leaving anyone behind, with joint but differentiated responsibility, and we must avoid market and commercial distortions and distortionary impacts in the market. We must use the global funds to make these commitments a reality and really generate the light of hope that we have set as a goal for ourselves. Thank you.
Councillor, for your contribution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm making my way now for us to hear from Her Excellency Mercedes Sombila, the Undersecretary for the Regional Development Group at the National Economic and Development Authority of the Philippines. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. On behalf of the Philippine delegation, let me convey my gratitude for allowing me to speak in this dialogue and contribute to the meaningful and relevant discussion. Our session today is about interventions and measures to achieve an accelerated recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and to quickly reverse its possible long-term scarring effect on the economies. An unprecedented crisis demands unprecedented recovery. These efforts, nonetheless, should not only prepare us, people and communities, to recover and build back better from the pandemic, but also to other compounding risks, including those resulting from climate change and other natural disasters. This effort should be more holistic, inclusive, and sustainable to ensure durability of resilience. When the pandemic struck the Philippines, the country has already put in place solid reforms and macroeconomic fundamentals that provided assistance to the most vulnerable groups, formulated plans and strategies translated into actions to contain the spread of the virus and to facilitate the safe opening of the economy. This included the updating of our Philippine Development Plan to include strategies that address current vulnerabilities, strengthen health systems, and build up resilience. The Philippine economic growth rate of 8.3% in the first quarter of 2022 was a testimony that our strategies and interventions have all been in the right direction. These encouraging results do not make us complacent, not only because the virus is still very much in our midst, but also because of the country's vulnerability to other natural hazards. We continue to observe the minimum health protocols as we push for greener post-COVID recovery strategies embedded in our Philippine Action Plan for Sustainable Consumption and Production towards a more circular economy. The Philippines, however, is doing its share to overcome the root causes of pandemics and natural disasters. But we are just a small country in this planet Earth. We will not yield the needed strong impact to safeguard it from further harm. We will need to work collectively to implement the numerical measures that we are hearing in this session and that reverberate in several numerous meetings. We should not waste time to conquer the risks for the prosperity of all. Thank you and good morning again to everyone.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We should not waste time. Again, an emphasis on urgency. Distinguished guests, I'm going to the distinguished representative of Viskogen Agroforestry, and I would love to give you the floor, Madam, at this moment.
Thank you for this opportunity. The theme of Stockholm+50 is a healthy planet for the prosperity of all, a statement VI Agroforestry stand behind. Our planet and its people are facing many challenges, ranging from poverty, pandemics, war, and not least the climate crisis. Those who have contributed the most to the climate crisis must take the greatest responsibility for solving it, although we all have to work together. We would like to present the unsung hero of the future, the smallholder farmer. Over 80% of the world's 6 million farms use an area of less than 2 hectares, but still contribute to about 30% of the world's food production. Assisting these farmers to farm sustainably, apply agroecological principles such as agroforestry is the future. By upscaling agroforestry, you create green job opportunities in agriculture, which is a big field of employment currently in decline, but with the possibility to turn the trend around and recruit especially the youth. Remember, there will always be a need for growing food. Stable income and social protection is necessary, which a diversified farming system like agroforestry can offer. We also need to make sure our unsung hero, the smallholder farmer, receives support to deal with the effects of climate crisis. International development assistance levels must remain at their current level, if not increasing. And the climate finance must remain a priority. Climate finance should be directed to the sustainable agriculture with the aim of or with the aim to fund a green and fair transformation of global food systems. In short, we need to change mindsets. We need to value climate justice, equity, and resilience more. Asante.
Asante sana. Thank you very much, Madam. And bringing the smallholder farmer into the conversation, the unsung hero, as she has described it. Distinguished guests, I am now turning our attention to the distinguished representative from Chatham House. Over to you, please, sir. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join the dialogue today. Dear Excellencies, the need to adopt and scale up resource efficiency and circular economy is highlighted as a key message in the current Leadership Dialogue 2 draft document. This is very commendable, but specific details on how to achieve this objective are currently lacking. Given the importance of circularity for the transformation of high-impact value chains, for the economic recovery, to tackle plastics pollution, and for phasing out fossil fuels, we have 3 recommendations for the draft document and one wider proposal to initiate a global circular economy roadmap process. So first, the text mentions the need to align investments and environmental objectives, but it does not link it specifically to financing circular economy solutions, technologies, and business models. To save resources and reduce pollution, there must be a significant increase in financing for high-value circular economy opportunities across value chains, and especially for developing countries and SMEs. Blended finance and investment guarantees that support public-private collaboration are key to de-risking and incentivizing financial investments for circular economic development. And second, the text mentions the need to minimize the downside risks and negative consequences of the digital transformation in terms of energy and resource use, but it does not mention the need to tackle the global e-waste crisis. Electronic waste is the world's fastest growing waste stream, and circular solutions are needed not only to reduce waste and pollution, but also to ensure long-term resource security of critical materials that are needed for the clean energy transition. Developing countries as recipients of e-waste shipments urgently need investments to build appropriate treatment facilities and financing for environmentally sound recycling and to create decent working conditions. Third, the transition to a circular economy needs to be an inclusive process. An inclusive circular economy is one in which livelihoods are protected, informal sector workers, women, and most vulnerable. Furthermore, an inclusive circular economy acknowledges workers' rights and shaping policies directed at them. Thus, social dialogue and participatory roadmaps are key elements for a just transition from linear to circular value chains. And this leads to the proposal that we have. In the run-up to Stockholm+50, Chatham House convened a series of international multi-stakeholder dialogues to identify key areas for collective action on the circular economy. We consulted with over 100 stakeholders, public, private, civil society, and other major groups. And there was a very strong support for the idea to initiate a global roadmap process for an inclusive circular economy that would raise ambition and accelerate the transition globally and locally. I'd be happy to discuss this with member states and other stakeholders further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contributions. A global roadmap towards the circular economy. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are now giving the floor to the distinguished representative of the University Student Chambers International. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. Dear Excellency and distinguished delegates, on behalf of the thousands of youth, Jin Tiger, a 25 years old youth delegate from Japan, want to share our recommendations on behalf of the children and youth major group. Compared to the half of a century ago, our social problems, as listed in COVID-19 epidemic, has become more complex and integrated, and the government's gaps have become more visible with greater precision. Whereas many countries and connected society, economically and culturally, and more sectors promoting the solidarity across the board. We, the youth, are here to leverage these connections as our resources and call upon member states to deliver the feasibility and concrete actions. To ensure healthy and clean land, air, and waters, we must work on to minimize plastic and chemical waste. We welcome to the mandate by UNEP 5.2 to establish a science policy platform on chemicals, and we call upon full and meaningful inclusion of all major groups in the next steps to establish the platform. First, we urge the establishment of a system that may ensure that stakeholders, including the youth, have the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process and regularly present practical examples and science-based opinions to decision-makers. for the green adaptation measures in our countries. We also emphasize the importance of incorporating the support structures for the investment and finance, both public and private, that takes into account all SDGs elements and regional characteristics. Secondly, because the implementation of all strategies and policies to ensure and preserve habitat for ecosystems, communities, and vulnerable groups affected by the climate change and environmental degradations. Third, we also have the need for the system of lifelong education to introduce these practical examples and technological developments to develop for human resources capable of triggering the social change to be sustainable. We also commit that these measures will lead the transition to green jobs and innovative that will be transform the society. Finally, we are currently in the hardest hour, facing the global epidemic of the COVID-19, conflicts of the nations, and global changes, such as the climate crisis. We ensure our allies, can put an end to this time by setting a bold and ambitious framework and taking actions from here. The time to change is now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. The time to change is now. The energy that we're getting from the young people at Stockholm+50 is absolutely electrifying. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am making my way to His Excellency Yutaka Shoda, the Vice Minister for Global Environmental Affairs in the Ministry of Environment of Japan. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. As we stand at a major turning point in the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to achieve a transformation toward a sustainable and resilient social system instead of building back our society just as it was before. While we are asserting our determination to continue our effort to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees, it is essential to redesign our economy and society in the new normal. The year 2022 is the year of implementation to promote climate actions in this critical decade. Japan will take up the challenge of achieving an ambitious 2030 reduction target, which is consistent with our 2050 carbon neutrality goal. We also put a high value on support for adaptation to climate change. Japan will double our support for adaptation over the 5-year period, providing a total of approximately $14.8 billion in the public and private sectors. Concerning biodiversity loss, Japan attaches great importance to the adoption of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and its prompt implementation. We believe that it is critical that the 30 by 30 target will be included in the framework, since healthy ecosystems maintained by achieving by 30 by 30 can serve as a basis to promote nature-based solutions, or NBS. Japan regards climate change and biodiversity loss as an inseparable crisis and actively promotes NBS, such as eco-DRR, to cope with extreme weather events. Regarding circular economy, based on the Plastic Resource Circular Act that went into effect this April, we will promote the circular use of plastics throughout the entire life cycle of plastic products. When promoting the circular economy, it is essential to collaborate with businesses. Last year, we launched a public-private partnership with Keidanren, Japan's largest business organization. Japan will continue to work with the international community. So let's move forward with post-COVID-19 green and inclusive recovery and work together towards sustainable and green economies and development. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your contribution. Distinguished guests, I am moving from the Minister of Japan and I'm making my way to Her Excellency Arzu Onsal, the President of the Climate Change Office of the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change of Turkey. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Co-Facilitator. Excellencies, globally we have been facing multiple complex challenges. Climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, migration, and more recently, pandemics. They dramatically affect our economies, societies, and nature. All require immediate and robust global action. As science underpins, we are in a highly critical decade to save the future of our Earth. The COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in over 6 million deaths, taught us the importance of striking a balance between human health and nature. We have also witnessed how our consumption habits harm our world, nature, and biodiversity. Slowdown of our economies during the pandemic reduced our GHG emissions. However, quarantine measures disrupted not only the polluting sectors, but also the activities to combat climate change. In the recovery period, our economies need to become more sustainable, efficient, and climate-friendly. A combination of green investments and just transition reforms can ensure a climate-friendly post-recovery. This crisis should be a driver for transition towards more green-friendly production and technological upgrades. We cannot return to business as usual before 2020. This leadership dialogue will share good practices and develop common understanding on these matters. Thereby, it will support international solidarity for a green and just transition. As we recover from COVID-19, Turkey took significant steps for building back better. We supported the most vulnerable with various social transfer programs, such as social protection shield packages. With the scope of economic stability shield package, short-time working allowances, concessional credits, and specially targeted programs for specific sectors were utilized. While we are trying to support the national economy, we worked to take steps for a more sustainable economic development as well. We are preparing our climate law right now. It will support the green transformation of our economy. We have also been developing our long-term strategy in the line with the 2053 net zero emission target of Turkey. Green transformation requires technological transfer, finance, and capacity development for all countries. We have to change the way of doing business. At this point, international solidarity is important, especially for developing countries. To conclude my remarks, I would like to express my wish for a healthier and cleaner world. I thank you.
We thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, I'm making my way to Mr. Mano Mano, the Director of National Environment Management Authority of Kenya. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Kenya recognizes that the COVID-19 pandemic posed a serious challenge to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals as the world enters the UN Decade of Action and Delivery for Sustainable Development. As a country, we experienced economic recession, which exacerbated environmental degradation as resources were diverted from efforts towards restoration and protection of environment to supporting critical safeguards and provisioning of preventive medicine. As a developing country, we were faced with a multitude of interrelated crises that urgently needed stepping up of financial support to implement the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, the Africa Agenda 2063, and the Kenya Vision 2030 in full and in an integrated manner. Kenya therefore calls for increased agility and heightened responsiveness from states and non-state actors, including international agencies, to intervene and contribute positively in a timely and meaningful manner. In this regard, it is proposed that actions should comprise of immediate short-term recovery interventions, for example, short-term measures to support local communities, civil societies, and small-scale enterprises to mitigate against lost jobs and revenue. Mid-term interventions spanning 3 to 5 years to provide developmental support regarding the physical and social infrastructure that will support the recovery of the key sectors. And looking at the long-term intervention, for example, 5 to 10 years in the area of research and development, and investment also to improve the resilience of future shocks and natural disasters and contribute towards the sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for those horizons, short-term, medium-term, but also looking at the long-term. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, giving the floor now to the distinguished representative of the International Labour Organization.
Thank you very much, Madam, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. The International Labour Organization appreciates the opportunity to join the dialogue this morning. The COVID-19 pandemic profoundly affected the world of work, and it exposed the inequalities and the fragilities in our economic and social systems. Millions of jobs have been lost during this crisis. Income has declined, and several businesses have been closed temporarily or permanently. Yet the pandemic has proven that when governments have the will to act, they can respond to any crisis in a decisive manner. The pandemic has made it evident that a healthy life, a safe workplace, and productive economies, they all depend on a sustainable environment. Ladies and gentlemen, over 1 billion jobs rely on healthy ecosystems. This means that there will be no jobs on a dead planet. A COVID recovery must be a sustainable and inclusive recovery, one that builds a better life and a better world for people and planet, ensuring a just transition for all and leaving no one behind. It must connect growth in labor productivity with gains in resource efficiency. A greener, more resilient and equitable world is within our reach. However, it requires deep changes in economic and social systems. The Iowa tripartite structure with representatives of governments, workers, and employees as active agents of change can bring an important contribution, and we look forward to engaging in this agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And a reminder that there can be no jobs on a dead planet. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm giving the floor now to the distinguished representative from the Global Strategic Institute for Sustainable Development. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madame Nazifo. Distinguished delegates, I would like to congratulate you all on initiating this impactful dialogue to understand the science of present and future. Let us bring science, technology, and innovation to the central stage to support peace and dignity of planet. Due to rapid urbanization, industrialization, and corporatization, the global environment has entered into a dangerous zone which severely affects climatic conditions that ultimately becomes a threat to our existence at this planet. The current heat waves in South Asia is a testament to how our actions have direct impacts on livelihoods and development. The destruction of nature and life on this planet is inevitably linked to the unlimited expansion of the greedy capitalist system. Due to its exploitative functionalist nature, capitalist culture is contradictory to the right to life and International Human Rights Charter. At this critical turning point, it's the market which decides the relationship between human beings, nature, and science. Today we need to rethink scientifically and transform the system in which we are all operating. The inherent contradictions of the existing system pose serious questions on our common sense and everyday life. The primary question is, who are the benefiting from this system? Why are all these sustainable initiatives not being translated into the welfare of the most vulnerable among us? We need to reevaluate our whole frameworks and definitions of sustainability. We believe that sustainability can be achieved through investing on science, through collaborations and partnership, which is a core essence of goal number 17. This collaboration should specifically emphasize meaningful stakeholder representation. Scientifically oriented collaborative mechanism teaches us to stay united and accelerate the protection of planet for the people. We strongly believe that inclusive scientific dialogue is a way forward to identify hurdles and to find appropriate solutions. For inclusive sustainable recovery from the pandemic, we propose, number one, scale science and environmentally friendly impact technologies, engaging youth and millennials. Number two, promotion of the scientific spirit and greener recovery from the pandemic. Number three, scientific exchange programs in the form of South-South and South-South-North triangular cooperation. Number 4, acceleration of scientific collaboration and exchange visits, especially between United Nations entities and public funding mechanisms. Number 5, global legislation on cryptography and decentralized artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies. From the platform of Global Strategic Institute for Sustainable Development, we are struggling to bridge public policies and sustainability through the promotion of scientific knowledge, collaborative research, and advocacy. We need more support for achieving the global goals through the promotion of science, collaboration, and networking. Finally, I would like to share my thought that alone we can do so little. Together we can do a lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Igniting the spirit of science in 5 very distinct and practical ways. Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, I'm opening the floor now to the distinguished representative of the Network of Rural Women Producers in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And it's a pleasure for me to be here in Stockholm, Sweden, and be a part of this exercise. I want to share with you what we have been doing in Trinidad and Tobago as we talk about the action. We are not going to spend much time speaking about the problems because we all know what they are. We have started on the Earth Day, the 16th days of activism, where we planted 16 trees on the first day, and on the end of the 16 days, we planted another 16 trees, 32 in all. We returned to that very area on Earth Day, where we encouraged 12 communities to come together at that community and launch what is now known as a community garden. So we know that the importance of food, and I heard earlier on the representative from the Food Administration spoke about the importance of food, and we know that in Trinidad and Tobago, our export bill on food is very high, and therefore we need to be able to manage that. On another area, we have started with the Girl Guides of Trinidad and Tobago. This is another national project where we are dealing with the plastic pollution. The young girls are involved in collecting the bottles, which we use as receptacles for plants, so that they are able to learn and understand about the environment as well as grow food. And the other project that we have been working on, this is in one specific community. Again, we are recycling and using the recycled product to earn. So again, we are working with young people here in this exercise. And one of the other innovative projects that we did, this was something that was done about 3 years ago, where 6 civil societies organizations came together. We sourced funds from the European Union, and we were able to train 12 communities in and around the country to understand the value of advocacy so that they could speak for themselves, and instead of attacking government, which is what it appears that civil society does, we have trained them to work with government so that they can advocate for what they need in the environment and have a better understanding of the environment. And finally, one of our key projects was training the young people to recognize the beauty, the sounds within their communities. And we give them prizes for this, because here they are able to learn about the environment, to love the environment, and in some cases, earn from the environment. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Practical, innovative solutions coming from Trinidad and Tobago. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we hear now from Madam Eva Primer, the Research Director at the Environmental Institute of Finland.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to contribute to this important dialogue. Like González Munoz before, I'm 50 years old. Honored co-chairs, dear panelists and participants. During the pandemic, Finland benefited from our preparedness for crisis management. Building on science and intersectoral collaboration, our response was well-paced, well-communicated and well-received. Finland's equal school system continued to function, service businesses were supported. Most importantly, Finns had access to nature and they used this opportunity. These experiences are not unique to Finland, but they are typical of a wealthy and equal nation. The downside of such societies is high and disproportionate, globally disproportionate material and energy consumption. Coming out of the pandemic, we have not yet seen strong global signals of travel and material throughput remaining at a lower trajectory. Hence, it is of utmost importance that the recovery is governed to ensure sustainability and green transition and to phase out the unsustainable. We support the EU Initiative on Sustainable Consumption and Production Forum and Stepping Up Circular Economy. The pandemic opened new windows for cutting down fossil-intensive practices while still increasing social cohesion and solidarity. Also, the horrible Russian war in Ukraine has provided with new compelling reasons to replace fossil energy with more sustainable sources. The important areas to govern in time of recovery from and also during crises are, first, harness sustainable innovations and enable connecting systems with open science-based solutions, digital meetings, and improving accessibility. To account for systemic impacts, make global chains of food and goods more transparent, including also biodiversity impacts. Second, ensure that investments during and after crisis are sustainable, applying sustainability criteria such as the EU taxonomy and the so-called do no significant harm principle. Third, continue phasing out unsustainable technologies and industries, enabling adaptation and supporting vulnerable groups during this adaptation. Keeping directionality towards a shared vision is a precondition for coming out of crisis stronger than before and preparing for upcoming crises, because new crises will come. I reiterate what Janis Potočnik just said. A sustainable world needs resilient societies. Only resilient societies can maintain a viable and healthy planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Only resilient societies can maintain a healthy planet. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we're making our way now to Madam Laxmi Denwati, the Director General for Climate in the Ministry of Environment and Forestry from Indonesia. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, moderator and panelists. We enter the third year of living under the new normal, an era where we have to deal with the multidimensional impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Not only has it affected the life and livelihood of people everywhere, but the pandemic has also hampered efforts and undo much of what has been accomplished in our sustainable development, including in environmental management. Despite this, our government remains steadfast in its commitment to environmental and forestry protection. Through prioritizing activities and adhering to corrective measures, Indonesia has been successfully maintaining its effort to sustainably manage its environment while mitigating the COVID-19 pandemic and recovering from its socio-economic impact. Several measures have been also taken to improve our overall national response to the pandemic, namely, first, continuously improving our water quality monitoring to ensure better water, sanitation, and hygiene access. Second, better managing medical waste in the household levels and healthcare facilities, including by producing reliable and affordable syringe readers in cooperation with the state agencies in charge of research, technology, and higher education. Third, easing permit for medical facilities while strengthening their monitoring measures. Fourth, collaborations with our state-owned machinery manufacturing company, PT Pindad, to produce medical equipment. And fifth, coastal community involvement in mangrove rehabilitations, social forestry, and degraded land rehabilitation. Co-chair, moderator, and distinguished delegates, Indonesia believes that challenges are there for us to summon with greater collaborations, cooperations, and solidarity. We therefore call for countries to continue in joining hands and work together in solidarity to reach a sustainable and inclusive recovery for all. It is now the time for concrete action to recover together, recover stronger. I thank you.
It is now the time for concrete action to recover together and to recover strongly. Distinguished guests, I'm making my way to the distinguished representative from Saudi Arabia. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, the interconnected challenges of ensuring energy security, energy access, and sustainable economic growth, and addressing climate change, the environment, and biodiversity requires an unprecedented level of open and inclusive collaboration among us. To emulate this spirit, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has launched the Saudi and Middle East Green Initiatives, which includes increasing renewables contribution to local power generation to 50%, energy efficiency, hydrogen and carbon capture initiatives, and a clean cooking initiative to spur action to benefit more than 750 million people worldwide, and an ambition of planting 10 billion trees in Saudi and an additional 40 billion in the region, as well as initiatives to raise protected lands to more than 30% and protecting biodiversity. Leading to COP26, we doubled our nationally determined contributions and announced our aim of reaching net zero by 2060 through the circular carbon economy approach. Yesterday, we were reminded of an important milestone for all of us, Glasgow, a moment after a year of action. Today, more than ever, we need to accelerate our work, and I would like to highlight 4 specific areas. First, to maintain economic and climate-friendly growth, finance needs to drive investment for and reduce costs in all solutions that reduce emissions and contribute to achieving the Paris Agreement goals, including technologies highlighted by the IPCC report, such as carbon capture and removal technologies, in order to enable all energy transition pathways. Second, ambitious and effective climate action will continue to require a balance between mitigation and adaptation action. Third, an inclusive recovery must be driven by just and equitable energy transitions, sustainable development, and poverty eradication, and based on national circumstances. And fourth, yesterday we heard from several colleagues that the future is circular. Beyond circularity of materials, we are committed to advancing the circular carbon economy approach, which seeks to apply circularity to emissions, an approach that has been endorsed by G20 leaders. We encourage our international partners to work with us on reducing, removing, and closing the emissions loop for comprehensive and ambitious climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. 4 distinct actions clearly outlined. Distinguished guests, I am making my way to the distinguished representative from normative.io. Sir, you have the floor.
Oh, there we go. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm worried that in the next 10 years, all major businesses will claim to be carbon neutral. But still, we will see global emissions go up, not down. The cause of this contradiction, I suspect, would be what we call unintentional greenwashing. This is when enterprises combine good intentions with bad mathematics. Today, money companies with good intentions invest in low-quality carbon offsets that, without their knowledge, completely fail to reduce emissions. Furthermore, for an average large enterprise, over 90% of emissions are located in the value chain. So if you don't include your value chain emissions in your net zero target, that is bad mathematics. But I truly believe that a lot of this is unintentional and caused by a lack of knowledge and a lack of standards. So for any large enterprise that might be listening, I want to propose an alternative to involuntary greenwashing in terms of the following actions. Firstly, you need to take responsibility for and accurately calculate the 90% carbon footprint of your value chain, and not just the 10% of emissions in your own operations. Secondly, instead of investing in low-quality carbon offsets, you should collaborate with the companies in your value chain, many of them SMEs, and provide them with green finance that will help you go net zero together. This is also a question of climate fairness and justice. This climate crisis was caused by the global north when we prioritized our own growth before the health of the planet. In order to do the right thing, we all need, and large enterprises in particular in the global north, should invest in green technology in their SME value chains in the global south. This doesn't just create emissions reductions. It will create green jobs, welfare, and human well-being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good intentions with bad mathematics and an opportunity to get the equations right. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we go now and give the floor to the distinguished representative from the Recycling Partnership. Madame, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The Recycling Partnership is a public-private partnership. We're a granting NGO active in more than 3,000 communities in the U.S. and sharing our resources with more than 20 different countries. At the same point, we're funded by companies, some of the biggest companies on this planet, who are making commitments about recycling and the circular economy. So I come to this question of what do we do post-pandemic from that angle of company pledge and community need, and I'm left thinking about one word: action. But not just any action. We can't just get busy. We need organized, measurable, scalable action, driven towards system change, not step change. I'm focused on a circular economy. And I, like you, know that recycling alone will not deliver a circular economy. However, we will never have a circular economy unless we first fix recycling. So what are the organized, measurable, and scalable steps to fix recycling? I have three things: build, operate, and design for change. In building the system, we have to lean in to blended capital, but that blended capital has to be based on grants. We cannot loan our way out of this problem. Two, operating this new system of the future will require extended producer responsibility because it is expensive, and that is too much for communities to do alone, but we also need the innovation for the system of the future. Policy can help for that. Three, we need to design for an evolving system, leaning heavily on data. Tools like Plastic IQ that both hold companies accountable and help them navigate an ever-changing system. So system change is within our reach if we finally connect the size of the solution to the size of the problem, and I believe we can if we begin now with action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One word that gives us the opportunity to build and operate and design. Thank you very much, Madame. Distinguished guests, we now come to the distinguished representative from France. Madame, the floor is yours.
Merci.
Thank you. And good afternoon to everybody here in the room with us and to everybody following online. I would like to congratulate UNEP and the chairs for this very interesting dialogue, as well as, of course, all of the panelists for being here. The COVID crisis has had a devastating and unprecedented impact on global economies. It has also highlighted a number of weaknesses, especially in terms of value chains, and this in all countries. And I would say, like all crises, it also represents an opportunity. And this is what I would like to highlight. It represents an opportunity to make investments that are going to pave the way for the future. France and the EU, like many other countries, has pledged to achieve a number of very ambitious goals. It's also part of the Paris Agreement. And the recovery plan has been an opportunity to accelerate investment and to really meet our goals and pledges, and highlighting the three pillars of sustainable development in an equitable way. I want to highlight the environmental pillar, because this has been an opportunity for us to invest in areas that are difficult, such as energy efficiency, for instance, and really renovating public but also private buildings has had a great deal of success, and there has been a great deal of renovation going on across France in buildings thanks to this recovery plan. It has also been an opportunity for us to launch the market for electric vehicles. Secondly, I want to say that beyond the energy aspects, the recovery plan has also touched on issues such as agriculture, with special bonuses for agro equipment as well, that helps us to reduce the inputs in agriculture, such as water, for instance, and also for forests, and the circular economy. So we have a very balanced recovery plan, and that has allowed us also to bring about policy reform at the right time. And I think it's really important for us to use both of these at the same time. And this represents a real opportunity. I think the pandemic has woken people up to how vulnerable we are. It has encouraged virtuous behaviors, and it has also focused trust and the will to go even faster. Thank you very much.
A recovery plan that has also led to policy reforms. Thank you very much for that contribution. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we are giving the floor now to the distinguished representative from Morocco. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Today, the post-COVID recovery is an opportunity to build forward better by keeping in mind the need to align this recovery with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, especially when it comes to recovery investment. In this context, Morocco has initiated the implementation of major reforms and development projects, including the generalization of health insurance for all Moroccans and creation of Mohammed VI Fund to initiate and support economic recovery. In addition to social measures, we believe that circular economy provides a great opportunity to overcome the twofold challenge of optimal resources management and environmental preservation, in particular in context of post-pandemic situation. In this regard, I would like to share with you a few examples of measures taken by Morocco, especially in the context of the energy transition. First, firmly committed to the Paris Agreement, Morocco has elaborated in 2021 its long-term low-emission development strategies by 2050, based on revising our NDC with the new ambition of more than 45 GHG emission reduction by 2030. Two, the Kingdom of Morocco has voluntarily committed to energy transition under the wise leadership of His Majesty the King Mohammed VI by adopting an energy policy based primarily on renewable energy development, energy efficiency promotion, regional integration, and environmental preservation. 3, over the past 2 decades, Morocco has not hesitated to invest in renewable energies to the point of becoming today one of the leaders in this field. My country aims to increase the share of renewable energies to exceed 52 in the energy mix by 2030. Since energy is the backbone of any economic strategy, Morocco intends to capitalize on its achievements in recent years to position itself in emerging markets of the green or clean economy, a position which notably involves a process of decarbonization of our industry. In accordance with the higher royal guidance, new initiatives have emerged in recent years. This concerns in particular, 1, the adoption of a roadmap for development of hydrogen and for energy recovery from biomass. 2, the ongoing development of marine energy roadmap. 3, development of integrated program of programmed water desalination plants backed by renewable energy production units. And 4, the national industry decarbonization program by providing all the industrial zones of the kingdom with renewable energy projects. To conclude, I would like to underline that such transition requires colossal funding at the global level. Much remains to be done to mobilize funding of green projects and supporting financial development countries that have a strong potential for green economy. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the contribution, sir. Distinguished guests, now to the distinguished representative from Peru. Sir, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Let me also thank the co-chairs of this panel, the panelists themselves, and the hosts for bringing us together. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the links between human health and the health of the planet. We have seen the consequences for development in other areas. No one is safe until everyone is safe. And the same applies to the environmental crisis. The consequences on the environment affect us all, and we cannot continue doing things as we did before. The economic reactivation must be environmentally sustainable. The future of humanity is at stake. Antonio Guterres launched an alert. There is a 50% chance that we will not achieve the Paris Accord limit of 1.5 degrees increase in this limit. We do not have another 50 years. We either must achieve it in time or we will not achieve it at all. So these next 50 years are crucial. In Peru, we've making a lot of progress. We have reinforced mitigation and adaptation measures, and this is part of our national contribution, especially in the area of agriculture, forests, energy, waste management, and health. Alongside this, we have reinforced our commitment to sustainable development and to transitioning towards a circular economy and achieving carbon neutrality, reducing the wealth gap and the 2030 agenda. Developing countries have not generated the current situation, but we are pulling our weight and doing our bit to overcome these common challenges. We will also be meeting our environmental commitments, and especially in terms of financing and technology development. The challenge that we face is very large, but the consequences of doing nothing will be even greater. We have the knowledge, we have the tools, and it is now down to us to use them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have the knowledge, we have the tools, and now it is up to us to use them. We're coming back to the stage very shortly, 2 more contributions from the floor. And so at this moment, to the distinguished representative from Sri Lanka. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. I speak on behalf of Dr. Anil Singha, Secretary to the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka. His thoughts are important because he led a successful battle against the pandemic as the former Director General of Health Services. COVID-19 pandemic had devastating impacts on all countries, economically and socially. We observe a global recession and countries like Sri Lanka having low cushioning for external economic shocks due to economic composition hit hardly. Catastrophic impacts of pandemic created political unrest in my country. We are facing the worst ever economic crisis with scarce essentials like gas, fuel and medicines. Food crisis is not far if not take urgent actions. Countries like Sri Lanka depend on few sources of foreign reserves such as tourism, migrant remittances, and exports like garments and agricultural products. Frequent lockdowns, travel and societal restrictions affected badly these sectors. Therefore, we propose urgent national actions which include create resilient development pathways by rapid but sustainable industrial expansion and increased technology transfers. More ODI flows to increase economic resilience. And formulate coherent national socio-economic policies to minimize fragmented and frequently changing policies by learning from own past mistakes. Further, recovery should be socio-economic and political recovery, and it should be based on green recovery. Accordingly, key global actions for recovery include prevent future pandemics which will cause devastation if repeated. Commitment for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework because coronavirus is found mostly in wild animals and can transmit to humans provided conditions are conducive. Loss of biodiversity is a major cause because the wild animals have been disturbed leading to frequent contacts with humans. Strengthening global partnerships, including South-South and triangular cooperation for speedy economic recovery. We believe that post-pandemic recovery directly links with the triple planetary crisis, and it should be addressed by a multilateral approach. We therefore support more multilateral mechanisms, including trade and investments. Finally, we convey our appreciation for providing this opportunity to express our hardships to you all and recovery strategies proposed for countries hit hardly like Sri Lanka. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, our final contribution from the floor in this leadership dialogue comes from the distinguished representative from Guatemala. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Excelencias.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, panelists. I would like to thank the distinguished representatives of Germany and Indonesia for this important session, Leadership Dialogue 2, with the focus on inclusive development in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Following the consultations in our country, we have identified the following issues that we think are absolutely essential in order to achieve sustainable cooperation. Firstly, we must implement actions that are focused on economic development and on empowering the entire population in a way that is inclusive, especially for the most marginalized and vulnerable groups. Secondly, it is necessary that we reinforce the value chains so that we can seize market opportunities, increase production in the country and the income of the population more generally. For instance, the forest and agricultural mechanisms based on methods that ensure preservation and sustainable practices, especially looking to local communities who are responsible for preserving these natural resources. We must also improve sustainable practices for management to avoid damage to landscape and also to ensure protection of biodiversity. Also, we must continue strengthening the energy matrix so that we can ensure affordable and reliable and quality access to this service to the Guatemalan people. And Fourth, in order to ensure that the population can benefit from the changes implemented by the transition, we must strengthen the role of institutions in order to develop mechanisms for transparency, for accountability, and for developing binding public policies in an institutional and intersectoral way, guaranteeing public policy that actually increase and promote civil society participation in the decision-making process. And fifth, a fair transition to a sustainable economy, supporting green jobs in all sectors and protecting those most vulnerable to the pandemic and vulnerable groups and young people more broadly. Strategic alliances in this sense are essential in order to seize opportunities in the green blue economy as well as renewable energies. We also need support from the private sector and international financial institutions. Sixth, we've highlighted technical training amongst local actors in order to align the models for self-sufficiency and commercial growth. We must also support sustainable development in rural areas. Also, supporting the circular economy and quality standards for sustainability in a way that is truly green and blue and fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution from Guatemala. So back to the panel, and as you might see, we are completely out of time, but what that means is that you don't get to leave the stage without your reflection. We just make it a little bit harder, and what I mean by that is that there is, of course, a team that is dedicated to putting together all of the reports of all the conversations, and I do not doubt that they have a section in that report that says, for Leadership Dialogue 2, recommendations/way forward. If you could reduce those to 3 words, what would you say coming out of this dialogue focused on an inclusive and sustainable recovery from the pandemic are the 3 keywords that this team needs to make sure are captured as a way of summarizing the conversation? And because you started off with amazing energy, I'm going to let you go last because I want to tap into that energy when we start again. And I'm going to go all the way to Mr. Potonic to kick us off. What would you say are the 3 keywords that summarize the way forward and what it is that we need to do for an inclusive and sustainable recovery from the pandemic?
Yeah, you have done me a great favor to put me first. Resilience, resilience, resilience.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, resilience, resilience, resilience. I'll give that a round of applause if I was in the room. Thank you very much. So that's Mr. Potonic's approach. So I'm hoping I'm going to get other approaches coming through. So Madam Carling, let's come to you. What would your 3 words be that capture what needs to be done from here on?
Accountability, equity, and transformation for non-discrimination and justice.
That's 5 words, but we'll take them. Thank you very much. Let's give her a round of applause, please. Let me come to you, Mr. Rodriguez. What would you say are your 3 big words?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy that the no state and non-state actor is against the SDGs. Nevertheless, what we see out there in the real world seems like it's very different. Yeah. So instead of 3 words, I would say that the most important thing can be summarized in 2 words. Yeah. Policy coherence.
Policy coherence. A round of applause, please. Thank you very much, sir. So we've taken one from Ms. Carling to try and balance it out a little bit. So, Professor Boyd, you get to close us off. The 3 words that you would want to see bold and highlighted in the final chapter on the way forward from Leadership Dialogue 2.
Transform the system, respect human rights. 3 words each, but...
3 words each. Transform the system, respect human rights. Let's give him a round of applause, please. Now, before I let them go, and before I ask the co-chairs to come back on stage, maybe a final opportunity to tap into the voice of the broader room. So what we're going to do is we're going to put up on the big screens, and I'm going to ask my panelists to watch the little screens here on the floor. And you'll see that at the top of the screen is an invitation to go to www.menti.com. and use the code 59204884 and respond to the question on your screen. What is the one action that you can take for an inclusive recovery from the pandemic? What is the one action that you can take? And we're beginning to see some of those responses popping up onto the screen. Let's see a little bit more. Changes on values, which is beautiful, considering we had a huge focus on values and ethics yesterday. Let's see what others are contributing. Quality education for all, youth in decision-making, no youth washing, but real voice and real equity in those conversations. Raising our voice, justice, which is a big conversation that we also had and built on it today, and more youth in meetings. Systems change. We need to engage more, and the words keep coming up, and more engagement, people at the center, activism coming through, green jobs. Thank you very, very much for your participation. With that, can we give our panelists a big round of applause and welcome our co-chairs back onto stage? Thank you very much. You may descend stage to my left. Thank you very much for your participation. The words keep coming up on stage. And as my panelists leave, once again, allow me to welcome back our co-chairs to officially give their reflections and to close this dialogue.
Thank you, Nauzi. Distinguished delegates, our discussion today have been nothing short of inspiring and fruitful. I sincerely hope that they will help us forge our way to a healthy planet for the prosperity of all. This is our responsibility, and this is our chance to fulfill it. Today, I especially take note of, first, the importance of strengthening the global value chain to ensure a resilient global economy that includes creating access to and enhancing capacities of the small and medium enterprises in developing countries, SEEDs, and LDCs. Second, the vital role of women, youth, and the vulnerable in development activities. This will require access to education, capacity building, and regulatory framework to ensure their contribution. Third, as the digital economy, including e-commerce platforms, has grown in importance, we need an inclusive platform to address the digital divide and illiteracy everywhere, whilst managing the potential negative impact, amongst others, on energy consumption. Fourth, building back better must include green and energy transitions. We need real climate actions that walk the talk, not only mere commitments. Distinguished delegates, our discussions in Stockholm+50 are also closely related to Indonesia's G20 presidency. With the theme, Recover Together, Recover Stronger, Indonesia's G20 presidency aims to serve as a catalyst for a strong and inclusive global recovery and to give concrete deliverables in 3 priority sectors. First, on global health architecture, the G20 Indonesia strives to close the vaccination gap as the key to fully recovering from the pandemic. We also aim to mobilize more reliable funding for pandemic preparedness, response, and recovery. Second, on digital transformation, we need to promote equal access, reduce the digital divide, and ensure digital inclusion for all. And third, on energy transitions, to accelerate green and renewable energy and to push for innovative financing and transfer of technology in support of developing and least developed countries. Ladies and gentlemen, with today's multidimensional challenges, business as usual is not an option. This is the momentum for us to take a big leap toward recovery. To close, I wish to emphasize 3 keywords for our way forward beyond Stockholm+50: inclusiveness, transformation, and collaboration. Thank you to all panelists and Nozi, our outstanding moderator. To Minister Lemke, it has been a truly honor to co-chair the Leadership Dialogue 2 with Germany. I do really hope your G7 chairmanship will proceed smoothly all the way to the summit later this month. Thank you very much. I hand over to you, Minister Lemke.
Ambassador Tritariat, Excellencies, colleagues, thank you very much for your great contributions. It was fascinating to hear your thoughts on short and medium-term economic recovery measures that can lead to lasting, fair and sustainable solutions to dealing with the impacts of the COVID-19. I would like to share a few of my personal impressions of today's discussions with you. Firstly, time is running out, which is why urgent measures are required. It is clear that many necessary changes had not happened because the challenges are very complex. Secondly, speakers highlighted that the transition to a circular economy will play a fundamental role to enable this transformation. Speakers suggested that the dialogue we are having on a circular economy, as well as on sustainable consumption and production, has to be continued at a global level. Proposed output for such dialogue could be a roadmap on circular economy for all stakeholders, from governments to private companies. For businesses, an additional output was mentioned, a global circularity protocol that sets clear targets and couples these with a transparency mechanism to track progress. Furthermore, many speakers highlighted the importance of the demand side to also address the aspects of responsibility and equity. We heard about the importance of labeling products and enhancing consumer information to shift behavior. Also, aligning investments in key sectors, as for example with view to infrastructure, would enhance sustainable living patterns. Thirdly, we have a lot of very valuable inputs with view to the crucial role the food sector plays not only for sustainability, but also as a solution for overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic. Most notably, shifting harmful subsidies are increasing investment in sustainable practices, which not only strengthen resilience of our value chains, whose vulnerability have been once again highlighted against the background of the war in Ukraine. It would also empower the most vulnerable ones, most notably smallholder farmers. Addressing recovery in the food sector addresses all crises and supports those people that directly depend on nature. Lastly, international cooperation is crucial for meeting our responsibility as an international community to protect global assets. In 1972, the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, speaking at the UN Conference on the Human Environment, put it like this: "It is absolutely necessary that concerted international action is undertaken." But unlike 50 years ago, we are not starting from scratch today. We can build on international agreements, know-how from best practice examples, and many good initiatives. This work should be intensified in the framework of cooperation mechanism to enable effective implementation of the many instruments discussed today. We now need to act quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the very interesting discussions. It was an honor to take part as co-chair together with Ambassador Tariat. Before closing the leadership dialogue, I would like to remind you that the international meeting will conclude its general debate under agenda item 7 this afternoon at 3 p.m. in the plenary hall, while Leadership Dialogue 3 on accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development will be held in this room at 3 p.m. The closing segment of the international meeting will begin at 6 p.m. in the plenary hall. Leadership Dialogue 2 of the Stockholm+50 international meeting is now concluded. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All the best for your G7.